Recording in progress.
Good evening, everybody. This is the Hayward City Council meeting on February 21st, 2023. I'd like to open the meeting this evening, and I would. It is my honor to call on Mayor Pro Tem Andrews to lead the Pledge of Allegiance. And Madam City Clerk, if you can take the roll.
Yes, good evening. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Andrews. Present. Councilmember Goldstein.
Present.
Councilmember Marquez.
Present.
Councilmember Roach.
Present.
Councilmember Syrup.
Present.
Councilmember Cermeño.
Here.
Mayor Salinas.
Present. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to now turn our attention to the Mr. City Attorney for closed session report. And I think he is joining us online. And if you are talking, we do not hear you.
Mr. Mayor, I don't think he has joined just yet.
Okay.
Would you like to return to that item after public comment?
I can.
perhaps?
I sure will. Thank you. Okay, so I'd like to now turn to our special presentation for Black History Month presentation, and I have asked Mayor Pro Tem Andrews to facilitate the proclamation. We have 3 proclamations. One to BWAPA, one to the NAACP, and the third one, the what? Urban League of Bay Area with Mr. Maxey in the back. So why don't we walk over to the front over there, and we'll present them over there, and we'll take pictures and stuff. Actually, we can turn this. Actually, why don't we do this? There you go. And then why don't you go ahead and we can ask, who should we invite first? BWAPA?
Yeah, we can do that.
Let's do BWAPA first. Ms. Duncan.
Sure. So we're going to have the President, Rita Duncan, to accept the proclamation. And it says, whereas the importance of Black history in our nation's history was honored with a week-long celebration starting in 1926 and expanded into a month-long celebration as Black History Month or African American History Month during the nation's bicentennial in 1976. And whereas Black History Month celebrates the achievement of Black Americans and pays tribute to the central role of African Americans in the United States history. And whereas the Association for the Study of African American Life and History that organized the first celebration in 1926 has selected Black Resistance as the theme for 2023. And whereas the City of Hayward is recognizing Black history with a series of events at both branches of the Hayward Public Library throughout the month, including a scavenger hunt for teens, public screenings of African American films, storytelling, and with the renowned African American storyteller, conversations with an African American judge and author, and many more. Now, therefore, I, Mayor of the City of Hayward, do hereby proclaim February 2023 as Black History Month in the City of Hayward and urge its recognition, participation, and support by all residents.
First of all, thank you for this honor. And I'd like to just educate a little bit, if I may. BWAPA stands for Black Women Organized for Political Action. This year marks its 55th anniversary. It was started in, 55 years ago by 12 African American women. And the mission was to activate, motivate, support, and educate Black women in the political process so we could influence equity and social justice as far as in education, criminal justice, health, and housing, actually, for African American communities. And you may know some of the WAPA members who have made history, and I'll just name a few. We could start off with Vice President Kamala Harris. We'll move on to our Barbara Lee, Honorable Barbara Lee, as well as Honorable Malia Cohen, and our State Secretary, Dr. Shirley Weber, as well as the two recent district attorneys, Pamela Price and maybe you know Diane Beckton and Contra Costa, as well as the two mayors, Mayor of San Francisco, London Breed, and recently elected Karen Bass in Los Angeles, all are the WAPA members, as well as Teresa Cox, Honorable Teresa Cox, and she's at Fremont City Council, and our own, Honorable Andrews. All have made history because they're the first women to be elected for those particular positions. And I'm really proud to honor them and to accept this proclamation. So thank you for the time. This is mine. Oh, okay. And we do need to do this, don't we?
All right, so next we'll have the NAACP. And we have Rahima, who is, what are yours? I'm sorry. Rahima Walker from NAACP, Hayward, South Alameda County Branch.
Good evening, everyone. On the behalf of the Hayward NAACP South County Alameda Branch, Ms. Freddie Davis, we thank you, we appreciate you, and we look forward to working with the City of Hayward and many more opportunities and activities with building our community together again. Thank you.
And next we'll have President Ken Maxey for the Urban League of Bay Area.
I will be short and brief. Thank you, the esteemed council, mayor and vice mayor. My name is Kenneth Maxey. I'm the CEO of the Urban League of the Greater San Francisco Bay Area. We're an organization that has been nationally around for over 100 years, but here in the Bay Area only for about 2.5 years. It's our resurgence. Hadn't been here for 25 years, but we're here to stay. We're focused on workforce and economic development for African Americans and underrepresented communities. And so that's 9 Bay Area counties, and we look forward to working or continue to work with this wonderful city of Hayward and other cities around the Bay Area. So thank you again.
And while the Honorable Rita Duncan certainly has listed an illustrious group of women worthy of acknowledgement, the one African American leader we love to acknowledge up here is our very own Mayor Pro Tem Angela Andrews. So let's give Angela Andrews a big round of applause. Okay. Let's see. Thank you for that. Before I move on to public comments, I see that our city attorney has entered the room, and if you could report out closed session, that would be great. Thank you.
Apologies, Mayor and Council. The Council did meet in closed session today at 5:30 pursuant to posted notice and the Brown Act. With all members present and no public speakers, the Council considered the following matters. One, under pending litigation, the Council approved settlement in the matter of Lynch versus City of Hayward in the amount of $525,000, with the city contributing $250,000 from the risk fund budget. Settlement was moved and seconded by Council members Zermeño and Marquez, respectively, and it was approved unanimously. Under anticipated litigation, the Council discussed one matter and took no reportable action. There was property transactions related to hard parcels on the closed session agenda. That's the Hayward Area Recreation District. The Council did not have time and continued this matter to next Tuesday, February 28th. The closed session adjourned at 6:32 p.m.
Thank you, sir. I'd like to now move on to public comments. This is reserved for anybody in the public to make a comment on something that is on the agenda or not on the agenda. Do we have any public comments this evening? And I believe I see one online is Susan Gilkey. And if she is able to, go ahead and key up.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I'm calling about something that is probably not a strong priority in the city, but I think it is becoming a priority to many of us. And that is the issue of cats. I have cats myself. I love cats very dearly, but the problem of them overpopulating in the city is becoming greater. Last week, I wrote on Nextdoor my concerns about people not getting their cats spayed and neutered. And I was frustrated at the time because of a neighbor whose cat constantly has kittens, even though I've tried to educate them more than once. And so I posted this thing on Nextdoor, and I actually got over 200 reactions from people, including 50 comments. So people in the city are very concerned about what's happening. And many of us who do love cats are taking in stray cats, cats that have been abandoned, because we want them to have homes and a decent life. But we're taking in many more cats than we can afford really to comfortably do it. And so I really hope in some way, and I don't know the answer, I admit I have no idea what the answer is, but in some way, I hope that we can help control the overpopulation of cats. It's just not a healthy situation for any of us, and it's becoming more of a problem despite all of the efforts made in the community to help with feral cats. The people still move away. They leave their cats behind because they can't, for some reason, take them with them. And so the population continues to grow. So that's my comment for the evening. And I don't know where this falls in all the priorities the city has to deal with, but I do think it is a bit of a priority to be able to address this problem. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to, I believe I've seen this acronym before, but it's the South Hayward Neighborhood Association, I think, but SHNA.
Yes, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for allowing me to speak. So I would like to just quickly touch on the Navigation Center. We've become aware, and this is very sensitive for the residents there because they're in fear of retaliation. But there has been physical abuse and threats within the program. People also are being held against their will by other residents. There's an indifference of staff and the mandatory reporting of these acts are not being reported. Police have been out to the Navigation Center many times over the past couple of months, and we believe that this body is not aware of what's going on there at the Navigation Center. There has been a little resolution that has occurred with these issues, but I think we thought that it would be of interest that this body, the city council, understand what is going on there at the Navigation Center and have a advisor or have somebody there to understand why the police have been sent out there, these acts that have occurred, these threats and physical abuse, people literally being physically abused, beaten up. And so we are really concerned about this, what is happening there, because in addition, this is we would like to, see programs in the city that have, catch-alls or systems in place to avoid this kind of abuse. So we ask, again, the residents are in fear of retaliation for speaking out. And it will be, we'd like to ask the city to send, an advisor or send somebody who can go in and investigate and make certain that staff is not ignoring these acts and are reporting them, and to speak with the police department about how many times they've been out there. It's really unfortunate, but there's a resolution to this, and the resolution is making you folks aware this is going on, because this Navigation Center is a really important part of the city, and I think you guys being held in the dark about what's going on there is not healthy for the city or for the center. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to close public comments and move on to city manager's comments.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't have any city manager comments this evening. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to now move on to our action items with our consent calendar. And I would entertain a motion if, wait, hold on. I think Councilmember Syrup, was it for this item or?
Correct. I wanted to pull item 11 off of consent, and then motion for items 1 through 10.
Okay, so pull item, pull item 11, which is the, okay.
I'll second, and I just want to make a comment on item number 8.
Okay.
So 8 and 11 are pulled.
Okay, so I apologize, Councilmember Syrup. Did you say pull 11 and you'll move the item?
Pull 11, and I'll move items 1 through 10.
Okay, and then Councilmember Marquez.
I'm happy to support the motion. I just want to make a quick comment on number 8.
Go right ahead.
Okay, thank you. So on item number 8, this is submitting a letter to East Bay Community Energy. Really excited about this project. The Council Infrastructure Committee did vote unanimously to make a recommendation to provide solar to our low-income residents. So this is going to create a deep discount for low-income, considered disadvantaged communities through our census tract, and just wanted to appreciate the partnership with East Bay Community Energy and bringing cleaner energy to our low-income residents. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. And then City Clerk, if you can call the roll.
Yes, Matt. Yes, Mr. Mayor, we have a request to speak via Zoom. TJ, I don't know if that is for the consent calendar.
Yeah.
Would you like me to go ahead and allow to speak?
Sure, go right ahead.
Thank you so much. Item 9, if you could pull that one, please.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Item 9,
Okay.
the St. Regis.
Okay, we will pull item 9 also. Okay, so if the maker of the motion will amend his motion to move everything but 11 and 9, and if the seconder is okay with that.
Amendment accepted.
Agreed, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Madam City Clerk, if you can take the roll.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Andrews?
Aye.
Councilmember Goldstein?
Yes.
Councilmember Marquez?
Aye.
Councilmember Roach?
Aye.
Councilmember Syrup?
Yes.
Councilmember Cermeño?
Yes.
Mayor Salinas?
Yes.
Thank you.
Councilmember Syrup, you may go ahead with item number 11.
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to provide some clarification to the community when we talk about ending the local emergency. And I was hoping just to maybe have a little bit of a back and forth with the city manager. What does it mean for us to end the state of emergency for the city of Hayward? What impact, if any, does this have on our eviction moratorium? And what are some timelines that we can share around that? And then maybe if there's a little bit of public health information as to maybe the decrease in cases we may have seen, as well as any resources still available for residents that are experiencing COVID or fearful of contracting COVID. Thank you.
So it's a little tricky about sort of saying that the public health emergency or the local emergency is ended. We are taking this action to be consistent with the state of emergency ending on February 28th. As you can tell, we haven't really been in sort of the heightened state of emergency that we were when this first started, but one of the key reasons that governments declare a state of emergency is to ensure that emergency reimbursements or funding can come to the local government if the situation warrants it. And I think the other is that it allows the city to take special actions without some of the typical timelines we would need to take for new ordinances, new policies to go into effect. And I think we've come to a point where that authority is no longer necessary. I will say that, while our current Alameda County community COVID level is at low, there's still COVID cases in the county, but it has become, I think, a little more normalized. There are some things that will continue even after the state of emergency ends. We still have to report our case counts to Cal OSHA if we have employees who contract COVID. We still have our prevention and protection plan in place for employees in terms of protocols around cleaning and separation and quarantining if someone gets sick in the workplace. So those are still in effect even if the local emergency goes away. I will say that that of the total hospital beds in the county, only 3.5% were occupied by positive COVID cases in the last week. If you remember, at the height of the state of emergency, the hospital beds were almost 100% full, and we were close to capacity. And there was a fear that the county would run out of ventilators and other emergency equipment. So there's definitely a different degree of when the state of emergency occurs. In terms of the eviction moratorium, we haven't really publicly talked about the timelines because the city itself no longer has a city eviction moratorium. There is still a county eviction moratorium that in theory ends 60 days after the termination of the public health emergency, which I mentioned for the state is on February 28th. So we can't really give strict, advice, but what we, in terms of what's going to happen, when is rent going to be due, but the eviction moratorium will end 60 days after the public health emergency ends. And I think what we would recommend, we have a lot of partners, housing partners, support partners, that can assist tenants who are fearful of potential eviction due to unpaid rent. And we're looking to see if we can have Centro Legal and the library monthly to have on-site legal assistance for tenants who might need support. And then Echo Housing also has assistance for temporary financial hardship and move-in costs. So both of those resources are available in the county. I think, was there anything else that you had questions about specifically, or was
Thank you. Yeah, last question was about resources for folks that may need vaccination or healthcare related to COVID symptoms.
Yeah, so still, the vaccinations are pretty widespread, still available through different clinics, through Diversia Vasquez, La Familia is still operating a clinic. I just got my booster at Walgreens. It was very easy. You could make an appointment on their website, not pitching Walgreens, but most of the pharmacies you can do appointments for vaccination. So those are some resources as well.
Thank you, City Manager.
And then Do we vote after each item? Okay, so would you like to move that item? Okay. Moved by Councilmember Zermeño.
Second.
Second by Councilmember Goldstein. Madam City Clerk.
Yes, Mr. Matt. Councilmember Andrews?
Aye.
Councilmember Goldstein?
Aye.
Councilmember Marquez?
Aye.
Councilmember Roach?
Aye.
Councilmember Syrup?
Yes.
Councilmember Cermeño?
Sí.
Mayor Salinas?
Yes, and unanimously passes. Item number 9, and I believe we have a public comment on item 9 by TJ on Hayward Concerned Citizens.
Are you still able to hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay. I saw my hand wasn't lowered. Okay. Good evening, Council. I'm TJ with HCC. I asked to pull this item to again raise some transparency concerns around it. So far, I've heard mention of this project mostly in the form of a consent and appropriation of funds in June, August, and December of 2022, and now in February. You mentioned in the report under public contact that the item passed in August with no public comment, but you failed to mention that 2 of our group members did raise concerns when we had this item pulled on December 6th, and those concerns weren't captured in the minutes. First, did I see that the money funded to BACS to complete purchase of St. Regis was meant to be a loan? If that's our taxpayer money, then we as stakeholders, we are stakeholders, and I think we have a right to know what these funds are going toward. And when would BACS be expected to pay back the funds if it was a loan? Also, what rehabilitation needs to be done on this site? That was mentioned this time around. It's something new. Is it just superficial refreshing like paint and floor, or is it something major like seismic retrofit? It's an old building from 1965, so no doubt there needs to be a lot of refurbishment. And last, this gap measure project is a huge deal on a John George caliber, really, except John George is its own entity. Here in Hayward, this multi-use project you and BACS are proposing is near schools, residential, businesses, and it's a major thoroughfare. So to say, well, it's not been made public because BACS is still going through approvals and transitioning staff and residents, et cetera, is not a satisfactory answer to me. Ms. McAdoo said in December that you would do community outreach of the center as the center opens, quote, next June, end quote. So are we speaking of this June? Why not do public engagement now? My colleagues have shared with me how the Abode project on Depot Road went. You had a lot of unhappy, unheard residents there. I understand in that situation that the state had control of approval for that project, but this one is all on you. I support what BACS wants to do here, but there's nothing on their website and nothing on the city's website about the intention, other than these consent item staff reports that you've placed in the agenda. My ask is for early inclusion of your residents, early inclusion as shared stakeholders who interface directly with the homeless and mentally challenged on a daily basis in some sort of public hearing, including representatives from BACS, as well as a dashboard on your city website. Thanks for letting me voice my opinion. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And then any other comments from up here?
We have a second speaker.
We have a second speaker. Oh, SHNA, the South Hayward Neighborhood Association.
Yes, thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Gabriel from the South Hayward Neighborhood. We want to just speak on a few things regarding the BACS program there at the St. Regis. We have brought this to the attention back in December at the meeting. We did comment, which is not in the minutes. And we're concerned that this project, first of all, there's been no CEQA determination. We were told that it is exempt from CEQA in the early 70s, which makes no sense. And would like the city to answer about CEQA, some kind of CEQA determination. Also, we are in support of this project. Don't get us wrong. We would love to see this project move forward. However, we're really highly concerned about the facility not having the proper management and oversight of the folks who are suffering from mental disabilities that they're in an area close to schools, close to a high intersection right near downtown. And, I spoke earlier about the BACS program at the Navigation Center and the abuse that's going on there that I don't think you guys are aware of. And so this is really concerning that we feel that this project should have discretionary review and public meetings so that the citizens can voice their concerns. We'd really like to see conditions put on this project that will answer to our concerns. We're more than supportive, but we're really concerned that a project will occur at that site and folks who are in the program will not be protected the way they should be as intended by the project. We really ask that, and we feel that if the city ignores our request to have discussion about this project, sets a very clear tone on the need. The city has decided that this project is going to be approved without community input, and I think that sends a very wrong message to community members. This body directs the city on how to move forward with business, and I ask this body to please consider, each member to consider and recommend to the planning department that there be discretionary review of this increase in use from a convalescent home to the facility that's proposed. And there are we've been talking about this, a lot of community members are concerned that there aren't enough conditions to protect the residents there and the folks who are getting mental health treatment. We want to make certain that there are safeguards in place so that they get the appropriate care and that we don't have an organization who is benefiting without proper oversight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. With that, I don't see any more public comment, and I'll entertain a motion.
I'll move the item.
Moved by Councilmember Syrup.
Second.
Seconded by Councilmember Goldstein. Madam City Clerk, you take the roll.
Councilmember Andrews.
Aye.
Councilmember Goldstein.
Aye.
Councilmember Marquez.
Aye.
Councilmember Roach.
Aye.
Councilmember Syrup.
Yes.
Councilmember Cermeño.
Yes.
Mayor Salinas.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to move on to work session and number 12, which is the Affordable Housing Ordinance. Discuss findings from Affordable Housing Ordinance feasibility study and proposed modifications of the Affordable Housing Ordinance. Report from the Assistant City Manager, Dustin Clausen. And I believe Mr. Clausen is online and he's going to kick this off.
I am here, and I will quickly get out of the way, kick it over to Christina Morales, and then also to our partners who helped with the study to help present this item to council tonight, and look forward to the questions and conversation. So Christina, take us away.
All right, good evening, everyone. So we're here tonight to discuss the Affordable Housing Ordinance. In March of 2022, we started discussing the item with first with the Homeless Housing Task Force and the Planning Commission to get a sense of what the priorities were for the Affordable Housing Ordinance. Based on their feedback to maximize the production of affordable housing through the Affordable Housing Ordinance, we entered into a contract with Strategic Economics to conduct a feasibility study so that we can not only look at what could be produced in terms of affordable housing requirements for on-site and also both fee revenue, but understand what is feasible within this housing market. That said, I'd like to introduce Derek Braun from Strategic Economics, who will be giving the bulk of the presentation tonight. I will mention it is highly technical and there's a lot of information, but it is very important to understand where we are in terms of the financial feasibility of development so that we don't implement legislation that would inhibit the development of housing in general. So I'd like to hand it over to Derek Braun from Strategic Economics. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christina. Good evening, Mayor Salinas. Good evening, council members. Give me just one moment to queue up the presentation and start sharing my screen. Okay, can you see the slide?
Yes.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to, as Christina mentioned, I'm going to be walking through the findings of our analysis. I should back up just a moment. I'm Derek Braun with Strategic Economics. I'm a principal with the firm. I've been leading our effort on this study. And I'm also joined tonight by Dina Belzer, who is the president of Strategic Economics. But I'm going to take a few minutes here tonight to walk through our work and the findings of it and how we develop the recommendations that are before you for discussion. So the purpose of today's item is to review those findings, to review the proposed administrative changes to the Affordable Housing Ordinance for its implementation. I'm going to open with an introduction, cover the findings, and cover those changes. So to start off with, I want to kind of start with a big picture take on why this study is so important, why the Affordable Housing Ordinance is so important. So about over half of Hayward's renters are currently housing cost burden, meaning that they spend 30% or more of their household income on housing costs. And you can see here in the chart on the right that 53% of Hayward renter households and 25% of Hayward homeowners are considered to be cost burdened. The Affordable Housing Ordinance leverages market rate housing development to create affordable housing opportunities. So it's one of several really important tools for addressing these needs for households at lower incomes and those that are cost burdened. So as I mentioned, the Affordable Housing Ordinance policy, it leverages the market rate housing development to produce affordable housing. So this policy applies to new market rate housing development projects. And although it does not directly control the types of projects proposed, that's determined through zoning and market conditions, the Affordable Housing Ordinance does require the percent of on-site deed-restricted affordable housing units that must be provided in conjunction with market rate housing development, as well as the affordability levels of those units, so the household incomes to which those units are targeted. The ordinance provides other alternatives to produce affordable housing and to meet the requirements, including payment of in lieu fees, which subsidize the development of affordable housing in off-site locations. The ordinance was last updated in 2017, last we studied then, at which time the in lieu fees, those fees paid in lieu of providing the on-site affordable housing, were increased. The Affordable Housing Ordinance inclusionary and in lieu fee requirements were applied to smaller development projects, and flexibility was increased for complying with the Affordable Housing Ordinance. So that brings us to today and the study that Strategic Economics has been completing over the last several months. The study was launched with the intention of ensuring affordable housing production occurs by revising the inclusionary housing requirements and revising the in lieu fees, studying the financial feasibility of the ordinance, and optimizing its potential to produce affordable housing by ensuring that market rate development can proceed and also at the same time provide revenue or on-site affordable units. Our process incorporated a lot of technical analysis as well as stakeholder input. So on the stakeholder and decision maker input, we held a session with the Homelessness Housing Task Force, conducted community surveys at different events, and also convened a technical advisory committee consisting of affordable and market rate developers active in Hayward. We also performed technical analyses, including the financial feasibility analysis and affordability gap calculations, which I'll explain later, to help to inform the in lieu fee amounts. So I'd like to open with describing sort of why we look at financial feasibility when we're looking at trying to make sure the Affordable Housing Ordinance achieves the goals of affordable housing production. Really there are two primary ways of producing affordable housing. And on the left is the idea of the tax credit project. And this is essentially a project that receives external subsidy. These are those 100% affordable housing projects that target pretty low household incomes typically. And they have a funding gap because the total value of the project that is generated by the revenues it can obtain from the reduced affordable rents or sales prices falls short of the total development cost in the right bar here, consisting of land costs, hard costs, soft costs, and investment return. And so there's a funding gap that gets backfilled with revenues from the city of Hayward, such as those produced by in lieu fees, as well as outside grants and low-income housing tax credits fills the majority of that shortfall. The other approach is the inclusionary housing approach, the approach that is addressed through the Affordable Housing Ordinance. And the inclusionary housing approach really relies on market forces. A project is feasible if the market value of the project in this leftmost bar meets or exceeds the required land costs, hard costs, soft costs, and investment return of a private developer. And the impact of the inclusionary requirements, of course, you have those affordable units, which provide lower revenues, which brings down the total market value of the project. And so our goal by performing an analysis like this is to find the sweet spot in which the requirements can be supported, development activity will move forward, and therefore it will provide inclusionary units or in lieu fee revenues. So as I was saying, those market rate housing projects do need to be financially feasible because the idea behind this is that developers will only build when projects pencil, when they are financially feasible. And really a lot of these costs and revenues that we're talking about change and are largely outside the city's control, which is why it's important to restudy inclusionary requirements and in lieu fees on a regular basis in order to make sure that they still meet the market and provide those affordable units. For those market rate development projects, it's really market demand that sets the price that buyers and renters are willing or able to pay in a location. There's a lot of factors that go into that. What's the location of the project? What's the type of product? Is it in demand from different households? What are the local amenities that drive people to be interested in the location? So this price is very local and often specific to jurisdictions or sub areas within jurisdictions. And then there are some tools. Cities do have some limited means of controlling some aspects that go into determining whether or not a development project is financially feasible. So, there are tools such as policy levers, such as parking ratios. A project still needs to provide sufficient parking to attract tenants or buyers, but in some cases, parking ratios can be adjusted downward to reduce costs. There are also density controls, such as FAR and height, things in the zoning code, and then also various incentives such as reducing fee requirements for certain products or density bonuses or streamlining of approvals or providing greater certainty that a project will be approved. So with all that in mind, with all these components of sort of what influences the ability of market rate housing to be produced, let's move into the first analysis that we looked at. So we examined the current Hayward Affordable Housing Ordinance requirements and compared them to a set of peer cities. So the current requirements of the AHO policy are that ownership housing products that are less than 35 dwelling units per acre in density, so these are basically single family homes and townhomes, those products that are ownership must provide 10% of the units at moderate income affordable housing. Ownership products at 35 dwelling units or greater per acre, so basically multifamily condominium products, have historically been difficult to build in Hayward for a very long time. So the requirement is lower in the current policy at 7.5% moderate income units being provided. And then for rental projects, regardless of density of the project, the current requirement is that 3% of the units are set aside for very low income households, 3% for low income households, for a total 6% requirement. The current AHO also allows for payment of in lieu fees instead of providing on-site units, allows for off-site construction of affordable units, or allows for an alternative proposal for compliance if approved. So as I said, we compared this policy against several other communities' policies shown here in these charts of Concord, El Cerrito, Fremont, Newark, Richmond, San Leandro, and Union City. And what you see on the left here is the on-site percent requirement. So here we have Hayward's ownership requirements and then their renter requirements. This ownership is actually an average of the 7.5% and 10% between the two different densities. You can see that Hayward's existing requirements are lower. The percent of units that must be provided as inclusionary units is lower than most of these other communities. Yet at the same time, Hayward has managed to produce more inclusionary units than those communities. You can see here on the right, the number of on-site units permitted in Hayward from 2018 to 2021 as inclusionary units, inclusionary on-site units. And you can see that Hayward's actually outperformed most communities. Fremont's a little bit of an outlier. It has a very strong development market, but still, with lower requirements, Hayward has seen success in getting these inclusionary units built. And I should also mention that on-site inclusionary requirements are especially helpful for producing moderate income housing. You can see in the left here in this chart, this is also the housing production in Hayward's 5th cycle regional housing needs allocation. And then of course you've recently gone through the housing element update process, and now we're in the 6th cycle. But the bar on the left in blue, it shows the progress towards the 5th cycle RHNA requirements. And you can see that progress was especially falling behind in moderate income units. And that's really the sweet spot that the inclusionary requirements are able to achieve. The level of subsidy required for extremely low or very low income units is typically very difficult to support through an inclusionary requirement and requires outside funding sources or deployment of in lieu fee revenues from the city. And then on the right here, we look at the units that have been permitted and how they were delivered by income level in Hayward. And you can see the very low income units are primarily delivered or entirely delivered through 100% affordable housing projects. Low income, mostly through 100% affordable housing projects. But then the inclusionary requirements did succeed in providing low income and moderate income housing. So the inclusionary requirements are useful for producing that difficult to subsidize through any other source, moderate income housing. At the same time, the in lieu fee revenue that can be generated through the AHO provides a major source of local funding for those 100% affordable housing projects. So fee revenue is Hayward's 2nd largest, and we also got data from Fremont, Fremont's largest source of local funding for affordable housing projects. These are 100% affordable housing projects that target relatively low income levels. And then you can see in the chart on the right here, this is Fremont and Hayward's local funding contribution. That funding is primarily generated through in lieu fee revenue, which is the in lieu fee option of the Affordable Housing Ordinance. And it comprises a very high percent of total local funding contributions. And this is in Hayward, this other category had a lot during this 2015 to 23 period. That included Alameda County Measure A1 bond revenue and public land contributions. Some of that won't be so available in the future. And so that just means the in lieu fee revenue is going to be even more important for subsidizing or providing a local contribution to 100% affordable housing. So really what my takeaway here is that the AHO meets the diversity of income needs by having inclusionary requirements, which can meet the needs of moderate income households, and at the same time having the in lieu fee option, which can help to provide a local contribution for very low income, extremely low income housing found in 100% affordable housing projects. So that was sort of looking backwards, and now let's look at the future of what we found by examining the current inclusionary requirements in the AHO. So there's a lot on this. I'll walk through it. But basically, when we performed our initial financial feasibility analysis, we looked at 6 different development prototypes. Or forgive me, 7 different development prototypes. And basically, you can see them listed here. We looked at single family developments, which is an ownership product, condominiums, ownership product, and then a couple different flavors, townhomes as an ownership product, and then a couple different flavors of rental projects, small multifamily, stacked flats, smaller multifamily project as well, a 5-story wrap, and a 5-story podium, meaning that the parking in the podiums on the ground level or lower levels was multiple floors built above that, and then also the wrap is housing wrapped around a central garage. When we performed this financial feasibility analysis, we found that really only single-family homes and townhomes have potential to support the current AHO requirements. Smaller rental projects were largely infeasible under the current AHO requirements, and then higher density rental projects were infeasible even without the AHO requirements. And so this chart on the right, what this shows is the residual land value for each of these development products or prototypes, first with no affordable housing requirements, in the middle with the existing AHO inclusionary requirements, and on the right with the existing AHO in lieu fee requirements. And basically, residual land value is the value left over to pay for land after you take into consideration all the revenues and costs of building new housing. The most important thing to just take away from this is that you compare that against the cost per square foot of land. And the idea is if whether or not the project generates sufficient residual land value to support paying for a site and allowing the project to proceed. And what you can see here is this band, this gray band, shows the value of the land that needs to be met for a project to be feasible. And this is where you can see single family gets there, townhomes get there. In very limited circumstances, some of the small multifamily can be within that range. And that's all with no requirements. If you add the affordable housing ordinance requirements, only single family and townhomes can support those requirements currently. So we met with the Homelessness Housing Task Force on September 28th last year. We presented these initial findings, and we received some guidance that recommended increasing the AHO requirements for lower density ownership housing products, those single family homes and townhomes. The feedback included modestly increasing inclusionary requirements for those products while still maintaining feasibility as market conditions evolve, maintaining the existing rental inclusionary requirement, maintaining relatively limited inclusionary requirements for higher density ownership housing products, those condominiums, and a preference that larger projects provide on-site inclusionary units. So the big takeaway is essentially increase requirements in single family homes and townhomes, maintain the existing requirements for other product types. There was no appetite for reducing the requirements, in part because for the really infeasible product types like the high density rental housing, it's not these requirements that are the main driver of those projects being infeasible. It's just overall construction costs relative to revenues. We also did gather community input at 2 fair housing workshops and a housing fair. There were only 18 respondents, which is not very many. However, a few key top priorities emerged that emphasize ownership housing and targeting specific income levels. And so this, you can see the top priorities in order: ownership housing, middle income households, extremely low income households, and then a few secondary priorities below that. And there were several others that received lower scores. So we went back with this information, guidance from the Homelessness Housing Task Force, guidance from the community, and we examined various scenarios for supportable requirements, adjustments to the requirements on the lower density ownership product types. What we ultimately arrived at is a conclusion that single family homes and townhomes can support up to a 12% inclusionary requirement if it consists of half low income households and half moderate income households. So 6% low income, 6% moderate income. This is a change. As you might recall, currently that requirement is just for moderate income households. It's at 10% for moderate income households. Now, we looked at what's the maximum requirement that could be supported. If you just used moderate income requirements, that was 22%. What's the maximum if you had a low moderate income split? That was 18%. But we got feedback from the Technical Advisory Committee talking about a lot of financing challenges right now, challenges with increasing construction costs, very rapidly increasing construction costs, the need to accommodate changing market conditions. So we performed a few sensitivity analyses that looked at what happens as construction costs increase, this increase in hard costs of construction. And this is how we arrived at the conclusion that 12% would accommodate some shifts in development conditions and therefore allow development to proceed and still support this 12% low and moderate income requirement. So this is just a recap of basically what I just said, but by having the 12% inclusion requirement split between low and moderate income, the low income affordability level addresses the priorities around meeting the needs of lower income households, as opposed to currently it's the moderate income households targeted. Maintaining that aspect of the moderate income affordability level recognizes that the AHO is really the primary tool for providing moderate income housing. The feasibility analysis supported this recommendation, including the sensitivity analysis. And of course, we're not changing the higher density ownership and rental product requirements since they are not currently feasible. And this is just a visual summary, but I think it's pretty clear. We're recommending shifting to 12% total maintaining the other requirements for rental and higher density ownership. So then the other side of this is we have to look at the in lieu fee, which needs to be adjusted since especially since we're adjusting some of the inclusionary requirements. Now, selecting in lieu fees really requires consideration of a lot of factors. One is the affordability gap, which is basically it's essentially the cost to build an affordable housing unit off-site. It's the gap between the revenues generated by that unit and the construction cost of that unit. So it's kind of like if you're not building it in the development itself, the fee revenue needs to cover that cost somewhere else. There's also development feasibility to consider, ensuring that projects can still move forward with the in lieu fees, as well as looking at other communities in lieu fees, because if you significantly exceed fee levels in other communities, and this is true for inclusionary levels as well, you may discourage housing development in Hayward and encourage developers to build elsewhere. And then there's also policy considerations about whether the fee is at a level such that it encourages developers to provide the on-site inclusionary or to pay the fee. Ultimately, we recommend increasing the in lieu fees for the lower density ownership products. So again, those single family homes and townhomes. And the reasoning is that since those requirements are changing for the inclusionary percentages, the fee needs to be adjusted to align with better with those changes. Maintaining the other existing in lieu fees on rental products, on higher density ownership products, acknowledges, again, they're in feasibility right now. And those fees also better align, the current fees for those products currently align with other peer cities as well. We heard from the technical advisory committee members that they really emphasize the importance of in lieu fees as a flexible alternative to, as marketing conditions change or development projects are in different locations, sometimes inclusionary makes sense, sometimes the in lieu fees make sense. And either way, the housing can proceed and contribute one way or another. And those in lieu fees, again, they do provide the lower income 100% affordable housing revenue source. And then lastly, the fee revenues, as I just said, the fee revenues are critical for funding that affordable housing production. Now, this is just a look at some of the data points used to put our recommended fee into context. So what we are recommending for single family homes and townhomes is that the inclusionary fee or the in lieu fee level be changed to $26 per square foot. And the current level of that fee is shown in the darker orange bar. So it's closer to $20 per square foot for those two product types. And what the blue bar shows is the affordability gap that we calculated. So basically the cost to the amount of subsidy required to build those units off-site. You can see that it's a little above $26 for single family homes, it's quite a bit below for townhomes. $26 is relatively high for the townhomes and right around the affordability gap range for the single family homes. We also looked at those peer cities in which you can see the maximum fee is found in Fremont. It's an outlier. It approaches $45 per square foot. But the median fee across all the peer cities was a bit below our recommended $26 per square foot. So the $26 per square foot is higher than other cities, but not so high that it's likely to push development to occur in other locations. So this is just the summary of the recommended fee level of maintaining the existing fees for rental and higher density ownership products and switching the current fee applied to products at 35 dwelling units per acre or less densities, having that go from $21.64 to $26 per square foot. I'm going to turn this over to Christina for some administrative recommendations as well.
Thank you, Derek. So in addition to looking at the affordable housing requirements under the Affordable Housing Ordinance, staff also looked at the ordinance in terms of implementation. How do we improve implementation, clarify things that may have been unclear to developers, looking at all of our agreements, identifying things that may conflict or ways we might be able to streamline the process. So we came up with a number of items that we would like to recommend for revision. First of all, the definition of affordable housing cost. Right now, it's very specific in terms of what we include in the definition of affordable housing cost, whereas in our agreements, it is a little more expansive to include all housing costs. So, for example, currently all projects are required to provide solar, which also includes the cost of a solar lease or the cost of purchasing the solar equipment, which in terms of the formula for setting the affordable sales price needs to be included so that we're not adding additional cost burden to these affordable units that's beyond the affordable sales price. So we're recommending making the definition more inclusive to include other items than what's currently specifically identified. Also looking at the affordable housing ordinance, the marketing plan is required at the very onset of the development process as part of the entitlement application, which most developers do not have a formal marketing plan developed at that point. And so we've just like to incorporate language that would allow delay of the marketing plan requirements, ultimately incorporating it as part of the affordable housing agreement to provide the marketing plan, also elaborating on the requirements of the need for the developers to affirmatively further fair housing and market the units in multiple languages. We also would like to request that the City Council approve that the decision-making body approve the affordable unit phasing plan. So the affordable unit phasing plan is usually required in projects that are built on a per building basis, or if it's a single family project, they might propose units be built in groups of 10. So they pull their permits in groups of 10, and we want to make sure that the affordable units are dispersed throughout the project so that they're not all developed at the end of the project, which risks those units not being built. Currently, it requires City Council approval, and consistent with changes we've made to the density bonus ordinance, we would like that approval authority be delegated to the decision-making body so that the developers don't have to go through another approval process for a phasing plan that really just affects the timing of release of the permits for development and the certificates of occupancy, and really intended to just make sure that there's always affordable units being developed in the groups of market rate units. Next slide. Additionally, we want to add additional priority preference to include people that have been displaced by city activity. In many of our affordable housing agreements for affordable rental housing, this language is already included. And just to make it memorialize it in the affordable housing ordinance so that it's clear to developers that this will be required by the city. This helps the city in cases where either we're involved in a development project and we have to help rehouse individuals. It can give these individuals priority placement on the wait list or in a newly marketed project, or additionally, somebody who may be displaced due to code enforcement activity if a unit is determined uninhabitable. So it's a tool in the city's toolbox to help rehouse an individual who may have lost housing. We also want to revise the formula for calculating the affordable housing resale price. As written, it requires a determination of the lesser of two indices, the consumer price index or the percent increase of the area median income. So practically speaking, all of our agreements either have one indices or the other, and they don't actually compare the two different index to determine which is less. From a consumer standpoint, if we're creating a formula that has two different variables, it gives less certainty to a potential purchaser to figure out or try to determine what their potential return on their investment in their home will be, because they're always trying to figure out, is this one less this year or this one's less next year? And it's harder for people to understand. So simplifying it by allowing the use of one of these two indices, and we're proposing to maintain them both, since we do have existing agreements that use either one or the other. Additionally, we're still evaluating this last piece, but increase the amount of in lieu fees that can be applied to the administrative costs from 10 to 15%. With since the adoption of the new ordinance in 2018, most of the projects have proposed including on-site affordable housing. Specifically, the larger projects have done the on-site affordable housing. So less in lieu fee revenue has been collected, which means there are less resources to cover the city's costs for administration of the ordinance. Lastly, we have other items, about 7 non-substantive items that we've included that are really for clarification purposes, where we find that developers may misinterpret what the city is intended by the language. So it's just for emphasis, adding additional language, such as clarifying that when we say size of the affordable units, we're talking about both the number of bedrooms and the square footage. So things that just elaborate on what the existing requirements are. And so these are amendments that have been put together by staff, not part of the feasibility study that was presented, but we feel that they will be helpful to staff in terms of implementing the ordinance and provide clarity to developers. So I'm going to hand it back over to Derek just to summarize and provide you the questions of the information we would like your feedback on.
Yes, indeed. So just to summarize the top level recommendations, in addition to those administrative changes that Christina just covered, they are to maintain the existing inclusionary requirement for rental products and higher density ownership products. Those are those ownership products built at 35 dwelling units per acre or above. The other recommendation is to increase the ownership inclusionary requirement for lower density ownership housing products, such as single family homes and townhomes at 35 dwelling units per acre and below, to increase that requirement to 6% targeted to low income households and 6% of the units targeted to moderate income households for a total of 12% inclusionary requirements. Third recommendation is to increase the in lieu fee for ownership products below 35 dwelling units per acre, increasing it in this case to $26 per square foot. And the last recommendation is to maintain the existing in lieu fees for condos at 35 dwelling units per acre or higher, as well as the existing in lieu fee for the higher density rental products. And so that brings us to the questions. And essentially the first first 4 questions here really are essentially asking, do you agree with those recommendations that I just covered? Do you support those recommendations? And of course, what questions do you have about them and how they were developed? The second last question is, do you support making the recommended administrative changes that Christina just covered? And the last question is also in your agenda packet regarding the timing of implementing these changes. And should the changes to the ordinance only apply to new applications for projects that are not currently in that application process? And I can bring these up again if needed, but I'm going to stop sharing screen for the time being. And thank you so much.
Okay. I'd like to, before I open up questions for up here, I'd like to first go out to the community and see if there are any public comment. And as people are lining up, I'd like to first call upon, I believe, Jesse Gunn, who is online.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. First off, I would say my name is Jesse Gunn. I'm a teacher and longtime resident of Hayward. I am not an expert in housing. I'm a math teacher. So while I'm okay with numbers, I'm less so about the laws and what works and what doesn't as far as market rates. But I did want to point out something that I saw that we were seeing as a success story in Hayward, approximately 20 permits over the last few years, which, assuming this is multifamily homes, we're talking about perhaps dozens of families who had a slight discount, a slightly less they were paying for new homes or rentals. And I'm just trying to figure out what is the purpose of the AHO if it's not to substantially fix or address the insane housing costs that we have here in Hayward. To go to a little bit of street level data, last week, members of SEIU and AODI, unions for the Hayward School District, were rallying in front of the district office for healthcare benefits because their average pay is $47,000 per year. And Mr. Mayor, I know you're working on goals, which I agree with, and I love this idea of making Hayward an education city. Hayward Unified is the largest employer in the city right now, and their support staff cannot afford to live here unless they are in that outlier group of the small number of families that are able to get 100% affordable housing essentially granted to them. And I think it's important for us to, as we're looking at the OHA, as we're looking at other ways to reduce housing costs, that we think about not just the percents, but how many individual families is this actually going to affect, going to help, and what more can we do so that the home that my grandfather moved out of when he moved to Stockton to buy his first home, that apartment is now renting for 400% higher than what he paid when he was renting it. And so it's pretty amazing to think about. We're talking about a few cents here in the terms of a much, much larger picture. So thank you for your time.
Thank you. I'd like to move on to Mr. Tom Ferrer.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello, City Council, and hello, Mayor. My name's Tom Ferrer. I've been a Hayward resident now about 30 years.
Okay, go ahead. Can you hear us?
Hello?
Yeah, I can hear you. You broke up. We just heard you say that you were from Hayward for 30 years.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I've been here at Hayward 30 years. All I've been hearing from staff and everyone else was, this is like kicking the can down the road. We've been having this conversation about housing for the last 20 years. We've been building condos, townhomes, but not much done for affordable, inclusive housing for everyone. People have been moving out, going to other cities, Tracy, Patterson, further out, even more beyond that. And then last year, Mayor Salinas, on the Homeless Housing Task Force, I was listening to that message, to your speech about no matter how much housing we build, we're never going to meet our arena numbers. And also, another thing is Julie Roche and Commissioner Bonilla on the Planning Commission, they also mentioned, let's get rid of in lieu fees. I'm 100% for that, but then meeting with the City Council the week later with Kelly and everybody, they talked you guys out of it. So I think it's a very important thing to get rid of in lieu housing, in lieu fees for everybody, so we could stay here in Hayward, live here in Hayward, shop here in Hayward, and not have the 5,000 students and their families go somewhere else from HUSD and having our schools closed. We got to make sure we grow our city and keep things moving. And affordable, inclusive housing is the key to that. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. I'd like to move on to Ro Aguilar.
Okay, good evening. I just want to summarize for you my perspective on where we've come this far, because this is quite a significant document we have here. And I want to say 2 years ago, I started advocating requiring the developers to build in new development above 20 units a specified percentage of included inclusionary affordable housing, owner occupied. Okay, so staff wisely recommended a feasibility study. And now that feasibility study is completed, and the feasibility study concluded that the current market could support the current 10% to 12% requirement, inclusionary affordable housing in owner-occupied single-family townhouse developments above 20 units in the moderate and very low income category. I hope I have that right. I know this is complicated. I think I do. Okay, so now we have the staff talking to the TAC, which is made up of developers. And the TAC, you know, they prefer not to have it required. Surprise, surprise. I want to see their books. I want to see how much profit they're making off these developments, if that's their preference. And I want the city council to investigate that. And I don't think we should listen to the developers on this issue. And it makes me a little upset to hear us bowing to the developer's preference here and not requiring them in that specified category in the feasibility study. So it's time to act boldly and initiate a new policy as indicated, and or you could choose to keep the status quo, which we have now, which is, you know, the feasibility study showed that we're the highest or one of the highest of inclusionary housing, but you know, the bar is extremely low. Please keep that in mind. 40 inclusionary housing units or whatever it was is not enough. So we want to get that bar way up there. And we also need to design a monitoring procedure should be implemented immediately after adoption of this affordable housing plan to determine accountability. And I have some comments on the monitoring plan, which I will share with staff and the council in the future. But I hope that you will consider changing this current policy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And seeing no more public comment, I'd like to turn now to my colleagues here. Councilmember Marquez.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for everyone for calling in. Ro, I appreciate and respect your advocacy, and you've been very consistent on your requests, so thank you for that. I have a couple clarifying questions. First is, can staff define actually who sat on the TAC committee? Because I think I heard something other than what was presented by Ms. Aguilar. So can you please just clarify which entities sat on the TAC?
Sure. Yeah, I think I can clarify that. So, the TAC members consisted of several market rate developers as well as one affordable housing developer. So we had Kate Blessing Kawamura from Eden Housing, Avery Jones of D.R. Horton, Stephen Clark of Amcal Housing, Kristen Paulett of Taylor Morrison, and Derek Larson and Scott Athern of Dollinger. Okay.
So is there a reason why we didn't outreach to more of our nonprofit housing providers? I think I just heard one being mentioned. Was there attempts made to reach out to those entities?
I don't believe there was a particular reason we didn't have more of them on the TAC. Christina, I don't recall if there were others that we.
I think what we were trying to do was get a sampling of different housing product types. So we had developers that represented rental housing developers, ownership housing developers, and affordable housing developers. We included Amcal being one of the most recent completed rental housing projects, the Dollinger property, which is the which is Lincoln Landing, was still under development at that time. AmCal also has an affordable housing arm to it, so it does develop affordable housing. Eden Housing produces within their portfolio, most of Hayward's portfolio of affordable housing is owned and operated by Eden Housing. And then the D.R. Horton representing the ownership product, along with Sohay, which had a rental housing component and included the inclusionary units in their project, both on the rental side and the ownership. So we thought those developers gave a nice sampling of the type of housing products that are being developed in the city of Hayward. Those both who have the experience doing the inclusionary units, which would include D.R. Horton and Taylor Morrison, and those products that did not include the inclusionary units, which were the two rental housing developers.
Got it. And so they would have paid the in lieu fee, the ones that didn't include it. Thank you for that comprehensive clarification. It makes more sense now. Thank you. I guess I have a couple follow-up questions. We saw the chart with the number of permits issued. Do we know a quantity of how many units that actually produced? Because it's not really clear to me. Was that 200, 1,000? I have no idea how many actual units that was. Do we know that number?
The charts that showed the permitted units, those were actually not projects. Those were actually permitted units.
So we've only had 20 units since we modified this ordinance?
And to clarify, we're looking at the number of units that were reported under our Affordable Housing Progress Report to the state of California, which uses the number of units permitted. So we have different data in terms of the development process will take a number of years. So the 40 units that we saw between the on-site ownership units and the rental units were really attributed to one project, which would be the Sohay project. But when we're looking at our pipeline and how many units we see coming up, but these are projects that are entitled but haven't pulled permits yet, we have a lot more units. So there are about 135 inclusionary units that have been entitled, but they haven't pulled permits yet. We're going to see a lot more units pulling permits when we do our next annual progress report, as we've had more projects that have made it to that phase. And then we've seen less projects that are actually paying fees. So over that time period of projects that were entitled since 2018, only 8 projects that consist of 134 units are proposing to pay the fee. So we've actually seen an increase in the number of units that are proposing on-site inclusionary unit. It's just not reflected in the data since it's based on permits pulled and not entitlements.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you for that clarification. And us looking at this feasibility study, the last time we did it was in 2017. The ordinance was adopted in 2018. Is it common practice to review this every 5 years, or are you aware of cities doing it more frequently?
I think every 5 years is pretty typical, and to some extent it also depends on the extent to which market conditions have shifted significantly since the last update.
Okay. I have more questions, but I'll hold them because I won't give my colleagues a chance. But can you please pull up the slide with the questions you want us to answer? This is a work session where I want to make sure I answer your questions, but there were many.
One moment.
We have them. Okay. So I'm going to read them out loud just because I should be more prepared, but I can't find that slide right now. So, maintaining existing inclusionary requirement for rental products and higher density ownership products. So I do not want to maintain. I do want us to increase. So I believe that is the 6% and 6%. I'm also in support of increasing the in lieu fee. I think we are trying to get as close to $30 as possible. In terms of the administrative changes, I really appreciate staff. I feel that staff has been listening to our comments up here. I know I've been asking a lot about priority preference to Hayward residents. also had concerns in the past with our marketing and outreach plan. So I just genuinely appreciate staff tracking all this information in the last couple of years, and just want to close with thanking everyone involved with this, but specifically Christina Morales and her team. I believe you started with us in 2018 or 19, but you've just significantly improved everything we're doing on the housing front. The reason why I don't support fully requiring on-site development is, if you could please, Christina, just highlight maybe the top 5 to 7 projects that the city of Hayward has put forward, with the fact that we have money in our housing trust. Those in lieu fees are very important to leverage more funding. So if you could just highlight some of the major projects we've done in the last couple of years, and I'll close with that. Thank you.
Correct. So we have funded 4 affordable housing developments, which will produce over 350 units of affordable housing that will be targeting extremely low to low income households. So it still provides us a range of targeted incomes, but really helps us to target individuals who are at highest risk of displacement, because they fall in the income category where people are struggling to pay rent. So while definitely the on-site inclusionary units, which is producing the moderate income households, is definitely a useful tool for targeting that population, the affordable housing in lieu fees is doing a better job at creating a greater number of units and targeting the populations that are at most risk of displacement. So in terms of the project, we have the Depot Road project, which is providing 125 units, and it will be providing permanent supportive housing with about half of those units. So substantially providing a resource to people who are experiencing homelessness. And we also have a family project that is being developed on 2nd Street. We have a senior project on Mission. And then lastly, we are supporting one of the parcel group 8, which will be providing 96 units of family housing. So we have quite a few units that we've been able to get underway, and we can build our portfolio of affordable housing the more fee revenue we have to support the growth of those units.
Okay, thank you. My last ask is, everything you said in my questions, if there's a way we could capture all of that before we adopt this, I think it's really important for the public to understand the benefits of approaching it in this manner, because you've hit all the numbers and it's extremely comprehensive. So thank you.
Councilmember Zermeño.
Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Morales, for the good report. Just a couple of quick questions and a couple of comments. Soft fees are fees that are paid for the city. Is that what they're called, soft? The permit fees, license fees, is that what they are?
Those are part of the soft costs, but a lot of the soft costs come from things like architecture and engineering, as well as those fees and a variety of other costs. So it's basically the component of the construction costs that's not labor and materials.
Okay, got it, thanks. In replacing council approval, so when would the council see the projects if we would not give the final approval? Should I worry that we would never see these projects?
No, so council would still see the projects that they normally see it. The only change we're recommending making is that currently the ordinance requires that council approve what is called an affordable housing unit phasing plan, which is a small component of the affordable housing agreement that basically allows developers to pull permits in a phased manner and also receive their certificate of occupancy. So it would only affect that aspect and it's only really requesting that if it is a project that typically gets approved by the Planning Commission, that the Planning Commission could also approve that affordable housing unit phasing plan, and that it wouldn't, that specific component would not have to go to the full city council for review. It's really just a mechanism to make sure that all of the affordable units don't get left until the end of a project, so that all the market rate units get sold, and if they're having financial troubles, they end up not developing the affordable units.
Okay, thank you. What would be a city activity that would displace residents? An example.
So we've had, after the adoption of the tenant relocation assistance ordinance, we've been working closely with code enforcement. So as they do inspections, they identified uninhabitable units or units that have not been permitted. And so in cases they have to issue a notice to vacate because the unit is not safe to live in. In some cases, the units can be brought up to code. They've just temporarily displaced and then they can move back. In other cases, the units cannot be brought up to code and the tenant is displaced. So we're able to use that language in affordable housing agreements so that we can get priority placement on wait lists for affordable housing for tenants that are living living in units that are not safe for human habitation.
Okay, thank you. 35 and 5 stories, they seem to be the normal numbers. How did we arrive at those? Why couldn't it be 40 or 30, and why not 6 floors?
So I'll take this one at a time. So that break point in terms of the unit density and how the requirements apply to those ownership units. Basically, again, just to reiterate, so the idea is that the requirements will be increased on development projects that are built at 35 dwelling units per acre or below. So those lower density single family homes and townhomes. And we're suggesting not changing the current requirements for projects built at 35 dwelling units per acre and above. That breakpoint is in the existing affordable housing ordinance, and we didn't see a compelling reason to change it because I think the intention at the time seems apparent. It was to try to capture the difference between single family homes and townhomes versus the higher intensity dwelling units. And then as far as the building heights, the building heights that we examined for those sort of mid-rise multifamily development products, the 5-story products, that's really based on sort of typical buildings that are constructed because of the life safety requirements and parking requirements. These are pretty common building types found throughout the Bay Area. So for example, in the wrap product, as I mentioned, that's a parking garage surrounded by wood frame housing. So the parking garage is concrete, which is relatively expensive to build, but then you surround it with the wood frame housing. It requires a slightly larger site, but it's a pretty typical development typology in the Bay Area. The podium parked product consists of, don't recall off the top of my head how many floors are in our prototype, but 2 levels, maybe 3 levels of podium parking with housing built above it. And that tends to be a pretty efficient way of delivering relatively high development densities and a relatively compact development site. This is a pretty efficient format for smaller sites, but a little more expensive than those wrap products. So a lot of this was based on just trying to identify products that are commonly built in the Bay Area, products that have been built in Hayward under some very limited circumstances in the past as well. So we really looked at what's out there.
Okay, thank you. How do we compare with other cities? And I'm asking this because the Bay Area does have one of the highest cost of houses. It's not just Hayward, it's the whole Bay Area. So how do we compare with the other 102 cities in the Bay Area? And thinking specifically, we don't want our teachers to be living in Tracy and then coming over to teach at Hayward. Only 10% of the faculty at Chabot College actually live in Hayward, and that's not something that we want. So Bay Area-wise, has that been studied? Are they doing what we are doing? Because I think what we're doing is good. Any thoughts?
Sure. I mean, I can start by saying, so, in our study, we did look at those other communities that I mentioned, and we looked at their current inclusionary housing requirements and in lieu fee options. And so, having an affordable housing ordinance like this is a common and often effective tool for delivering affordable housing units or those in lieu fee revenues. As I mentioned, Hayward's current requirements are a little bit lower than some of those other communities, but in many ways that has been a success story because the city has managed to produce more inclusionary units with those lower requirements, which sort of implies that in some other communities, especially ones with slightly weaker housing markets, maybe the higher requirements that they have might be actually kind of constraining housing production. So I think it's also very positive that Hayward is looking at restudying its current requirements. A lot of communities are doing that. Even San Francisco, totally different scale, but they're currently in the process of restudying their own inclusionary requirements and in lieu fees as well.
Okay. Thank you. So I agree. I like the recommendations. A slight disagreement. I'd like to see them higher. 12% in my mind. It is a modest increase from 10%, but I would actually go to 15. The in lieu fees, a slight increase would be nice because from what I understand, we built 350 low-income houses from our in lieu fees. So that's a very good number, unless I misunderstood. Implementation to the new ones, because the ones in the process right now would be unfair. I think those were all the questions that you had, if I remember correctly. I think so. All right. Thanks again. And let's keep doing this. Talk to our city, sister cities, so they do the same thing. Thanks.
Council Member, Mayor Pro Tem Andrews.
Thank you. I just also want to make a note. I want to not recuse myself because I want to talk on this topic, but I do know Derek Braun. We did go to grad school together. I'm sure Professor Sloan and Professor Fulton are very proud of us right now. But just want to acknowledge that. And then also want to acknowledge that he is a planning commissioner for San Francisco. So I want to give him kudos. I do have some questions. Wanted to know, I read in the report about Fremont getting to 20%, and a lot of it is due to the market demand there, and just wanted to see if we can have a little more details about that.
I think it's certainly something we could explore and come back with.
Yep.
And we did look at Fremont a little bit more, with a little bit more intensity as well in terms of sort of how they've been funding their affordable housing, but we can provide some additional detail.
That would be great. And then go ahead.
On Fremont, excuse me, I would just add that the Warm Springs BART station area has been entitled for, has been planned for 4,000 units. Mm-hmm. And they're building out now. So I think that rate of production has just been something that's been hard to replicate in other places because there isn't the same amount of land available for that level.
You said BART station, right? I just wanted
Correct. That the Warm Springs BART station.
You hear that, BART?
They did
BART could solve
a big they had
right
a lot
now.
of land available there.
Okay. Just want to acknowledge you said BART station. We have two. Yes, thanks for the reminder, Mayor. We have two BART stations. One other question I had was about the 12% 6.6, and I don't know if this is possible, but is there a way we can get to a mixture of the 12% and the in lieu fees being the equivalent of 8%? I don't know if that makes sense, but is there, if they can have a project where it's 12% on site and then 8 also can pay 8% in lieu fee? Is that a possibility? Is there any way we can have a mixture of things?
To clarify, so is the idea that
I'm trying to get us to 20%, and I feel like the on-site is the issue, but they're fine with paying in lieu fees. So wanted to see if we can do a split of 12 on site, 8 in lieu fees.
Based on our analysis, it doesn't look like that would be financially supportable, just because the 12% I do want to mention one thing to an earlier comment as well. So the 12% is not just going from 10% to 12% inclusionary. It's going to 12%, but also now making half of that, the 6% of it is now targeted to low income households as opposed to moderate income households. So that actually has a pretty significant impact on the total revenue that's being generated by the project for the developer. So it actually is bringing down the revenue quite a bit. As for layering on, 8% in lieu fees on top of 12% inclusionary, I think, first of all, the in lieu fees would technically become, I think you would have to increase the inclusionary percentage to 20% in order to make them truly in lieu fees, since they are in lieu of providing the on-site inclusionary units. And based on our analysis, it just does not look like under any circumstances 20% would be sustainable. And the in lieu fees would be kind of a comparable, slightly different, but a comparable impact on the project as increasing the inclusionary percentage.
Okay, so I wanted to bring that up. The reason why is because we are very fortunate in Hayward to have advocates for affordable housing. In a lot of other cities, it's the complete opposite. So I want to thank all the advocates and callers here tonight to advocate for a higher percentage. But as you can hear, it's very difficult to get to 20%. And that's the reason why I was trying to bring up this mixture or any other possibilities. We're having a hard time getting there. And I definitely would love to see 20%, but the numbers are not allowing for that to happen right now. So one other thing I've asked staff to do in previous meetings, and I don't know if it's possible, but have we walked through a pro forma, particularly with Ms. Aguilar, on how the development pencils? Like just a sample project so that they can understand what developers are experiencing when they bring a project to the city. I know we don't have the right to ask for them to open their books. Pretty sure we can't really do that, but is there a way we can explain the pro forma and analysis to them so we can have a better understanding of how we're getting to these percentages?
So we haven't had her meet with any of the developers yet, but we can certainly explore if that's an option. I have had individual one-on-one conversation with Ms. Aguilar just to kind of discuss really how we're trying to meet the various housing needs of all the community residents. And, the part of this is looking at some of the studies that she has evaluated and looked at and what the priorities are there. And I feel she's entitled to her opinion and perspective, but we're also need to include the feasibility analysis and really just make sure that it aligns with the target populations we want to serve. What we're finding is our current analysis of the affordable housing ordinance is primarily providing units that are on site that are targeting market income ownership units, which meets the needs of a specific demographic. So if policymakers in the city choose to really try to target a variety of housing needs, we have to look at producing as many resources as we can, if that includes in lieu fees to get to very low and extremely low income units, but also recognizing that the on-site inclusionary units are a very good tool for providing moderate income ownership units. And if we make this modification to include the low income, would provide limited equity ownership units that can then be a stepping stone to acquiring a market rate property and then take advantage of market appreciation. So it's one tool in the toolbox for producing affordable housing.
Okay, thank you. And then my last comment is the marketing plan. I appreciate it being pushed closer to when we open the development. And if there is I know there's a phasing of having the affordable housing, but I also would like to see if there's retail added on, having affordable housing first, then retail, then market rate units, if that's a possibility. Just because we are, as a city, we are missing out on retail being established when these housing developments are being built. So if that can be added in the middle of the affordable housing and the market rate, I would like to see that if that's possible. And then I'm for increasing to the 12%. If we can do more, great, but it sounds like we can't really do that. And then also the $26, I'm fine with that as well. Don't remember the rest of the questions, but I'm fine with the recommendations so far. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilmember Syrup.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll start with questions. I was curious, what is the low-income tax credit that affordable housing developers wanted to use on page 11 of the staff report, and was that incorporated into the current affordable housing proposal?
Sure. The low-income housing tax credit is sort of the primary way in which those 100% affordable housing projects are have their funding gap filled in the United States. And it's basically a competitive tax credit that an affordable housing project can be granted through the Tax Credit Allocation Committee of California, and then they're able to sell that tax credit on the open market to companies so that they can reduce their tax burden. Companies will pay for those tax credits, and that provides revenue to subsidize the affordable housing construction costs. So that doesn't apply to the market rate development that provides the inclusionary housing units or provides the in lieu fees. It's instead part of the many components of subsidy that are used to deliver 100% affordable housing projects, including the city's local contribution, which can come from the in lieu fees provided by those market rate development projects.
And then just to clarify, I think the question is in reference to a comment by one of the affordable housing developers on the TAC that they wanted us to change the income, or sorry, the affordable rents so that it aligns with the tax credit rents. Currently, we use the rents that are established under California Health and Safety Code. So at times, those rents do not align with the tax credit rents, and the city's rents can actually be lower than the tax credit rents. So we typically will work with developers to make sure that our rents do not impact their development budgets, and so that we can properly align the rents with the affordable rents under tax credits. But because we have used this on so many other projects to establish what our affordable rents are, and also because it's a requirement under the density bonus that 20% of these units use the health and safety code rents, we wanted to keep that system of determining the affordable rents for the affordable housing ordinance.
Got it. Thank you. And you may have answered this in regards to Councilmember Zermeño's question, but could you clarify what the decision-making body is in your administrative amendments?
Correct. So the decision-making body would be whatever level of authority is required to approve the entitlement application. In some cases, the level is administrative. Some cases, it has to go to the Planning Commission. And for most of the large projects, or if they require a general plan amendment, they'll all require to go to the City Council to be approved. So basically, the way the Affordable Housing Ordinance is written, if a single family home developer wants to get their building permits in groups of 10, which the city requires that they can only pull permits in groups of 10, they would have to pull the permits for the affordable units first, which we also require them be dispersed throughout the project. So they otherwise have to get this affordable housing phasing plan approved by City Council in a separate action. So it just increased the amount of administrative responsibility for the project on something that is that the city is actually dictating in our process for issuing permits. So by streamlining it, by letting the body that has the authority to approve the project, be it an administrative level, the Planning Commission, or the City Council, we just want to align the approval of that affordable unit phasing plan with that decision-making body instead of adding a second step.
Got it. Thank you. And then along the same vein, would administrative in lieu of fees go down if the streamlining amendments proposed were adopted? Would it still require the increase of 10 to 15%? I was just curious if you were basing that question off of the savings we anticipate or what it currently is now.
So we are increasing it to 15% based on the current activity level we see in terms of paying the affordable housing in lieu fee. Since we're seeing the majority of the project proposing on-site inclusionary units, we're looking at a way to increase the revenue. We still want to do additional review, just checking state law, make sure there isn't any kind of limitation on what we can apply to our admin costs in terms of an impact fee or an in lieu fee. But it is to offset the fact that the amount of revenue produced through the affordable housing ordinance is drastically reduced.
Thank you. Do we have demographic information and the housing status of the 18 community respondents that were on page 11 of the report?
We do not, no.
Okay, I was just curious because we're seeing a wide desire for different types of housing, but I'm curious who's asking for that housing and if they're projecting an imagined need or if they're speaking from personal experience.
What I can tell you is that one of the majority of the responses came from an affordable or a home ownership fair. Mm-hmm. So we are looking at the bulk of the respondents being from a demographic that is looking for ownership housing. Okay. And then the other respondents were at two fair housing workshops where we were looking at primarily renters.
Understood, thank you. And then when we talk about financial feasibility for developers, I think Ro alluded to this. What period of time are we looking at for something to be feasible? Because I imagine these projects will be feasible over a long enough stretch of time.
That's always the tricky thing in setting these revised requirements. And so, the primary basis of the analysis we performed is essentially today current conditions. But the reason that we did not maximize, go to the absolute maximum current supportable inclusionary requirement today is because conditions do change pretty rapidly. And, that's why we did that sensitivity analysis and the results to see that even with fairly modest construction cost increases, if you take that into account, it makes sense to institute the 12% requirement. And I should also mention, these are prototype development projects. They're sort of generalized based on market conditions found in different subareas of the city, but nevertheless, conditions will change. Any given site will have its own specific sort of advantages and disadvantages. And so, we look at this as sort of a generic starting point for understanding development feasibility. And we want to build in a little bit of flexibility, recognize that circumstances will change both for the better and worse, depending on each individual development project.
Got it. Thanks for that response. I want to zero in a bit more, though. So a developer trying to make profit, are they looking at it over a 10-year span? Are they looking at it over a 5-year span? How quickly are they trying to make this project, quote unquote, feasible? I'm looking for that specific number of years or months or whatever it is.
The developer's interest is going to really vary depending on the type of developer that they are and the type of development project that they're building. The developer does need to repay their construction loans. That's usually a fairly short span of time. But then after that, it becomes a matter of sort of the requirements of the lenders for the developer. And if it's a for sale project or if it's a rental project that they plan to hold or a rental project that they plan to then sell. So the motives and motivations and the payback time periods do vary a lot for these developers. And I do think that I'll leave it at that.
Okay, and so for the sake of this report, the window of feasibility would vary between different kinds of developers or in different kinds of developments. Am I understanding that correctly?
That's actually I just remember what I was trying to get to. So the analysis that we performed, it does take into consideration the different motivations and different approaches of the developers. But the analysis itself is what's called a static financial feasibility analysis. It basically translates the revenues generated by the project, if it's a rental project, into an overall project value. And that's based on current capitalization rates in the market. It's based on a lot of just current market expectations for return and for the value of a given investment. So we weren't trying to model sort of individual year by year revenues and costs for these development projects. Instead, the model sort of takes current overall expectations of development project return and applies them to the analysis.
Got it. Okay, thank you. And then last question, and I'll try to be brief. How was demand for various income levels calculated on page 5, figure 1? There's obviously a large gap between supply and demand for lower income housing.
Give me just a moment to get there.
Are we talking about the displacement study data? Where it's 4,700 units priced below 1,250?
So page 5, figure 1 of the staff report, Hayward Housing Supply Gap 2019, is that what we're looking at?
I think so. I haven't pulled up the report, but I think I know it. This was calculated as part of our displacement study. And what it looked at is the demographics of the city of Hayward and what people could afford. And so when you look at being able to pay 30% of your income on rent, it then matched it with the housing supply and what the rents were. And I think this was based on 2019 American Community Survey data, so they compared what the incomes of the Hayward residents were to the available housing supply. So they were finding that there's a mismatch between what the supply is in terms of rents and what the income. So it's another way of calculating rent burden, but tying it to the actual housing inventory. So it was showing that we need more affordable units that are more units that are priced below $1,250, which in current market constraints, we're not going to get market rate housing that's priced at that rent point. And so we really would need to subsidize the development of affordable housing to provide units that are that deeply subsidized to provide rents that meet the needs of existing community members.
Understood. Okay, thank you for that clarification. So as far as comments and direction go, and I have a few more comments, but I'll save for after all my colleagues have a chance to speak. I appreciate that this ordinance does make recommendations streamlining certain administrative processes to lower the cost of the development. I also like that it's prioritizing workers and residents. I believe Councilmember Marquez mentioned that. I think that's a great focus. This also serves the purpose of furthering our climate and sustainability goals and reducing commute times. I agree with increasing in lieu fees for lower density products. If inflation is a factor in my interest in increasing that percentage, but I also strongly believe that building low density moves us further away from our sustainability goals, given the resource consumption and upkeep costs that lower density neighborhoods require compared to higher density neighborhoods. So this increase also actually feels more equitable to me in terms of environmental justice. I also want to plug the Public Banking Initiative, which Council supported unanimously prior to my election, which aims to provide low interest financing for affordable housing developments. And I hope that the Budget and Finance Committee makes a point of prioritizing our involvement in that creation to secure those funds. And then as far as direction goes, I think parts of the updated ordinance that streamline the process should be applied to applications currently in the pipeline. I want to accelerate those projects if possible. I think other changes should only apply to new applications so as not to dissuade any in-progress developments from being seen to completion. I understand the desire to allow developers flexibility by allowing in lieu fees as a by right, but I also wonder if we can make that the city's choice so that we maintain leverage. I'm sure every developer walks into development knowing it's a negotiation, and I think it might be something that's beneficial to the city to have on the table. Along the same lines of maintaining leverage, I think raising the percentage of required inclusionary housing is reasonable. Even for rental units, I think council can always suspend it for a fixed period of time or on a per project basis. And I think this would avoid us having to hire consultants and revisit this percentage again. So I'm just wondering if this is something we want to give ourselves more leverage with now so we don't have to revisit it again later and bring on consultants again later. And then lastly, the graph that shows Hayward building more inclusive units despite having lower inclusivity requirements feels a little bit arbitrary to me because it seems entirely dependent on the market. Fremont has had higher requirements and still built more than we did because of special circumstances. So I don't want us to feel too dissuaded from giving ourselves the power to set a higher number and use it as leverage in development negotiations. And then I'll end my comments there, but I do have more for later. Thank you.
Councilmember Roach.
Thank you. I guess I shouldn't have too many questions. I got to do a lot of this work on the Planning Commission and saw this and saw this report, so thank you. And I really appreciate the slides on comparisons with our neighboring cities, because it shows the work that went in to find that sweet spot between our in-lieu fees and our on-site requirements in order to get these units built, and we are building them Hayward. But I think to Councilmember Syrup's point, I think there's also a climate in Hayward that allows that there's more encouragement, I think, for these to support our affordable housing ordinance. And I know on the Planning Commission, when I first started, we saw developers mainly coming to us with the in-lieu fee option. And over the course of 3 or 4 years, developers rarely came to us with the in-lieu fee option, and were usually choosing to build on-site unless it wasn't feasible. And so I do support. Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I totally understand that we need in-lieu fees, and I think now more than ever, because if the market is showing that it's not it's not feasible to build market rate rental units, we are going to have to leverage our in-lieu fees in order to build affordable housing. So I'm assuming, Christine, that it's sort of now more than ever we need that pot of fees to to leverage those fees for outside grants for affordable housing units. Is that right?
Yeah, so if we're seeing a reduction in rental housing production in general, and what we've seen in the study, that it's not feasible. Knowing that while ownership housing is a great resource, not everybody is ready for ownership opportunities, and there are constraints within the lending industry that may not be a viable mechanism for some people to acquire housing at this time. So having those affordable rental units available, and the more we can produce, the more we can fill kind of the gap as market rate rental housing is unable to be developed in Hayward.
Okay, and then our in-lieu fees, generally, I assume they're not used to build below market rate ownership units.
They have not been used to date, but we do have, I think we've just recently provided additional funding to a Habitat for Humanity project that would be providing 10 affordable ownership units. I think we have instructions from the City Council when we issue our next notice of funding availability, that it would include affordable ownership, which it is what we will find that if we do that, is that it requires a deeper level of subsidy for the development of affordable ownership units, because there is no other public source of funding for ownership units. So it's definitely something that we would continue to explore, as our use of in-lieu fees.
Okay, and I would like to see us, right now the ordinance reads, the first option under the ordinance basically is to pay the in-lieu fee, and I would like to have stronger language that makes clear our policy is we would like developers to choose inclusive units, unless staff decides otherwise. So, supporting what Councilmember Syrup said, that to make it clear that that's what we're looking for, but of course it's not. It's not going to be feasible in every instance. So I'm wondering what you think about that, and where you would make that language change.
I think I would like to take some time with that suggestion. I think there is a way to at least indicate that the preference of the city is to do on-site affordable housing, and just make it very clear that that is the top priority, and secondarily these other options would be available. I do think that is a good suggestion of kind of meeting middle ground in terms of just expressing council's preference, but also acknowledging that there are these other means of compliance.
Okay, and I don't know that the entire council feels that way, but it's a suggestion I have, and I would appreciate seeing some language on that, since there's a couple of us I think that have mentioned that. So yes, I would appreciate that, Mr. Morales, if you would come back with that. And I think just to go, I think that's generally the comments I had to make. And just to go to your questions, I think it's clear. So for the first question, maintaining existing inclusionary requirements for rental products, I think it's clear from the study that that it'll be some time before those kind of units are attractive to build. So I'm in agreement that we maintain the existing inclusionary requirement, and that I'm glad we're not trying to reduce it to somehow attract to make it more attractive, because it sounds like it doesn't matter whether there's an affordable housing ordinance or not. A yes on increasing the ownership inclusionary, and I'm really glad to see we moved from the 10% moderate to the split between 6 and 6. I was really happy about that change. Yes on increasing the in-lieu fee for ownership products and maintaining the in-lieu for condos. And I am supportive of the administrative changes for streamlining and clarity purposes. So thank you so much for the presentation.
Councilmember Goldstein.
Thank you, Mayor. And are you sure you have more to add? I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that. Just teasing my friend here. All right, very good. Yeah, you know, it's actually kind of fun because in my recollection, this is the third or fourth time that those of us that have served on Planning Commission have been able to participate in this project, and it's great to see it working its way through and all the new data that's come about and input from various sources and so forth. But I would like to point out one thing, and that is that this report is really about housing production. And as important as that is, that's only one piece of the puzzle in overall housing affordability. For example, we're not really even talking about things like housing choice vouchers, housing grants, down payment assistance, or even any of the private housing programs that have become available in the high-tech sector. And there's billions of dollars that are being applied around the Bay Area for things of that nature. And so I think it would be instructive and useful in this report, and I realize I'm asking an awful lot here, but it would be instructive and useful, I think, for us to have some guidance, some knowledge about how all those other pieces of the puzzle fit in to this. But if we're just addressing housing production, this report really is fantastic. Couple of questions, and I'm particularly, Ro Aguilar, I love it that she shows up consistently for these meetings and advocates for affordable housing. Ro, if you're still on the line, just know that I really appreciate you coming back time and time again to advocate for affordable housing. But on the subject of housing cost models, was there any attempt to use any of the available pro forma housing production cost models that, for example, I know the banks use them and actuarials at investment firms and, for example, CalPERS that invests in much bigger projects than this. But I have to imagine that those pro forma models exist. Were any of those used in at least vetting or used as a balance mechanism against the data that was provided by our volunteers, TAC participants? So I do want to acknowledge they did volunteer for this. But can you answer that part, please?
Sure. We did not look at any of the specific sources that you mentioned. We don't have pro formas from any of those entities. Our analysis, though, it did incorporate assumptions that were partly vetted through members of the TAC, through other developers that we interviewed, but also informed by a variety of projects that we've completed throughout the Bay Area for other clients. And so we see sort of the full range and the evolution over time of construction costs, of expected rates of return on projects, and we incorporate all those considerations into our work. So it's not solely informed by just any one developer or a little subset of developers, but we also track over time sort of what's happening with market and development conditions across the Bay Area and its various sub-areas.
Great. So I just want to repeat that because I think it's important to know that the data that they're using is from completed projects around the Bay Area. So it is informed data from real projects in probably recent history. I'm sure you're not going back more than a couple of years on this, on a kind of the cost models would be very different from 5 years ago than they were from, say, 3 years ago. Is that right? Using current project data?
That's right. Yeah, any data that we're incorporating needs to be from current and recent information because conditions do change.
All right, cool. Very good. So very important information to know. And I would also like to comment that, as I believe my colleagues have already said, the in lieu fees are needed. We need to have funding in the bank in order to qualify for loans and state and federal grants. So we're required to participate by ponying up some dollars, and we can't just shift everything to inclusionary housing. However, I love inclusionary housing because it does address those issues that Councilmember Syrup was talking about, environmental equity. We want people to, whatever their income level, to be able to live and benefit from the same neighborhood amenities that wealthier residents are able to. Better schools, better access to food, groceries, medical services, public safety. I mean, the whole gamut is really kind of tied to one's access to live in quality neighborhoods. And so inclusionary housing is vitally important. And at the same time, we also want to increase the means of affordability. So things like transfer payments and down payment assistance and other mechanisms like public banking that would not only make it cheaper for housing production, but potentially give us as a city the opportunity to underwrite loans for workforce housing, for example, to make it easier to give people access to the quality homes in the neighborhoods that they want, and not necessarily tie them down to deed-restricted properties, but give them access to properties where they can build intergenerational wealth through their property investments. If you can put the list of questions up, I'd be happy to answer those. I do support maintaining existing inclusionary requirements for rental products and higher density ownership products. I think that's key. Increasing ownership inclusionary requirement for lower density housing products across low income and moderate income. I like that split. I think that's fair, and I think that's a good faith step forward. You know, time will tell whether we're hitting the nail on the head, but I think it's a good step forward. Yes, we should increase the in lieu fees for ownership products at less than 35 units per acre, and maintain the existing in lieu fee for condos at 35 acres or higher, although I would suggest that we have a model in place that allows us, based on fluctuating costs, you know, these if costs plummet considerably for some reason, maybe availability of wood products or some new way of construction, I think we need to have a way to, put something in place where we can make those changes and not necessarily take 3 or 5 years to capitalize on sudden market changes that would make it equitable but affordable. And I do support making the recommended administrative changes. As to the question of should they only apply to new applications not in the application process, I'm not so sure about that. I think if there's an opportunity for a developer to look at that and say that they want to play, I think we should make that available. And I do think maybe in the inclusionary requirement for lower density products to 6%, I think we should do that. All right, I'm done. Thank you.
And so I'm going to channel one of my predecessors, and I'll give you a second bite at the apple, but be very short and concise.
Thank you, Mayor. Before I go, Councilmember Marquez, did you have additional comments that you wanted to read through? Okay. I was hoping it wasn't going to be just me. Well, now that the business is out of the way, I do want to thank the housing team, the Planning Commission, Strategic Economics, and everyone that played a role in bringing this comprehensive report before council. Also want to thank the Hayward Police Department for your patience during our riveting conversation. I'm going to get on my renter's soapbox, so that's why I needed the extra comment. Similar to what Councilmember Goldstein said, this entire conversation is about incentivizing new development and tweaking variables. I think the most shocking aspect of the report is that building rental housing, except for small multifamily projects, is not financially viable given market conditions. That's what I'm reading. I could be wrong about how I'm interpreting it. So if we assume conservatively that this market remains the same or worse for a few years, all of the tweaks we're discussing today, it's not going to address our affordability crisis for renters. And I just wanted to remind council and the public that this ordinance alone is not the only tool that we have at our disposal to increase affordable housing stock, like Councilmember Goldstein mentioned. A unit is a unit, and the city has the power to make above market rate homes more affordable once they're built. We've exceeded our market rate building goals and have vacant units across the city. We can increase our affordable housing stock by incentivizing vacant units to be leased sooner. We can ease demand for lower income units by helping families afford the units they live in right now. Last paragraph, I promise. What this report is telling me is that we can not only rely on the market to build us out of displacement. 47% of Hayward is renting, half of those households are burdened. Correct my math if I'm wrong, but that's approximately 40,000 people. And even if we managed to build 1,000 affordable units next year and helped 100 residents buy a home, we'd still have over 30,000 people at risk of displacement. We've been lucky and diligent over the last decade, but if developing dense rental units isn't going to be feasible in the coming years, we need to start looking at new tools beyond this ordinance, just like we did with Just Cause and the rent stabilization ordinance, if we're really serious about addressing the housing crisis. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate those. And you know, I wanted to, and I know Councilmember Sarup, I think it started out as a positive comment, but I think you were saying let's not take a lap around too soon. But I wanted to ask if we can go to slide 15 for a moment. Okay. And so, you know, this slide here is, you know, the title of it is Hayward is producing more inclusionary units than other communities despite having lower requirements. And, you know, this was between 2018 and 2021. And, you know, in putting aside Fremont, I think Fremont sort of is a special case. There's, you know, they're building a lot and, you know, but just focusing on Hayward and looking at, you know, in some of the comparable cities, you know, I think we're doing pretty good, you know, retrospectively. You know, I think we are, if you look at some of the other slides in here, you know, we have been producing housing for all income levels in the city. You know, and I think one of the takeaways in this report, as everybody up here has mentioned, and even the speakers or the you know, staff and the consultants, is that it's an incredibly delicate balance. And I think over the years, at least since, you know, I've been up here, I think that's what we've been trying to achieve. Councilmember Roach made a very good observation that, you know, when she was on the Planning Commission the first few years, developers were coming to her with in lieu fee. I mean, that was sort of like the automatic, you know, and the reason why developers stopped doing that is because up here, we started to tell developers, and we even directed staff, that if a developer comes to us with an in lieu fee project, we're gonna say no. And so, you know, you start to see this shift, right? And I think we have made the gains, and I'm not saying they're, you know, these extraordinary, you know, but I think there are gains, and let's acknowledge our gains, that we have been able to do that. And I should also say that, you know, I have to, you know, go to, you know, my colleague that's on the Economic Development Committee, who, you know, the reason why I put her on the Economic Development Committee is because she's always thinking about economic development on every issue. Even when it comes to public art, you're thinking about economic development. But if you look at the developments that we have built over the last few years, we've never let go of our street side for ground level commercial. We've been able to preserve that. And I know it's empty. There's, you know, if you drive up and down Mission, they're empty. But, you know, my mom lives in a city where they also have brand new developments, and that street side, you know, street level commercial is also empty, and it's been empty for a very long time. But we've saved it, like we've preserved it. And I think that, you know, I think that's been a key strategy that I think that we've been, maintaining up here. And then lastly, my last comment I want to make is, I forget who said it, but might have been Councilmember Goldstein, but if you read the report and if you really sense sort of the tone of the report, all of this is a very delicate balance. And I mean, even if you look at the example that Councilmember Andrews walked us through, just to get to 20%, I mean, it's a very difficult task to do. But developments, they're always open for negotiation, right? And while this is our ordinance, and while we're certainly, we'll be passing this eventually, but the thing is that developments are also open for negotiation, and we can negotiate these things. And so I just, one of the aspects of here that I'm always looking at is how much flexibility do we have? Not only does the Planning Commission, but also how much flexibility do we have as a council? Because we need this flexibility, and I think it's important for us to preserve our own flexibility when we do these developments. And the last comment I wanted to make was, the in lieu fee. The in lieu fee, it is important, and I think for all the reasons why you say it, but the in lieu fee is also incredibly important because we have one of the most powerful tools unavailable to us anymore, right? And that was redevelopment. And because that was one of the very first things that disappeared when I came here was the state legislature clawed back our redevelopment, and so it was our redevelopment funds that enabled us to build what we could build and get the affordable that we could get. And and I can remember when we were talking about redevelopment clawbacks, I didn't see the type of advocacy and I didn't see the type of pushback when we were talking about, or when the state legislature was talking about clawing back redevelopment. Only us up here were talking about it. But anyways, to the recommendations, maintaining existing inclusionary requirement, yes, I think that's fine. Increasing ownership, yes, I mean, I'm pretty much agreeing with everybody up here. Increasing in lieu fee for ownership products less than 35 to an acre, yes. And then, of course, maintaining the in lieu fee for condos 35 acres or higher. There was another question that was asked of us. I think it was in the staff report, but it was timing. When to what was it?
They just set it up a second.
Yeah. Is it? I think it was the timing of those projects that are in the queue right now, do we hold them to this new ordinance or not? And I think that's what you were mentioning. Last time that has been a difficult issue, and I don't know if we have a timeline or a date that is sort of the threshold, but I would have a difficult time saying that once we approve this, that all the people that are in the queue, that they're going to have to go back and rework all their projects. So I'm not, I would right now I would say I would not want current projects that are in the queue to have this applied to those current projects that are in the queue right now. But so that's where I'm at right now on that. Other than that, I think that is it. It only took us 2 hours, Madam City Manager, to get here. But I am glad that we are closing this item, and we will proceed to the next item, which probably will take about 15 or 20 minutes, right? Is that should be? No. So the next item, so thank you. I want to thank staff. Of course, thank all of the consultants for writing the report. and all of the folks that contributed to the development of this report. And of course, thanks to all of the council for their comments. Okay, so I'd like to move on now to item number 12, which is affordable. Oh no. Item number. I don't want to relive that one. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. That was a joke. Police Department's annual report. Receive and review the Hayward Police Department's annual report for calendar year 2022, and I believe our acting chief of police, Brian Matthews, will kick this off.
All right. Thank you very much, Mayor and Council, for having us here tonight to present to you. I'm happy to share our year-end report for calendar year 2022. Before I get started, though, I do want to thank the staff members from the police department who are present here. While I'll be doing the presentation, I was smart enough to bring all the people who have the answers to your questions, so they are in the room tonight also. And I want to thank specifically Lieutenant Garrett Wagner, Lieutenant Corey Lenteo, Leslie Hayes, and some other folks who really contributed to the staff report. As you all saw, it was fairly extensive, so we appreciate your patience. So tonight, I won't go through all of these. We're going to talk about a few different things that were included in the staff report. One that I do want to highlight is an update on AB 481, the military equipment policy and ordinance. When we came before you and the ordinance was passed, council asked us to come back at the 6-month mark to provide an update, and so we're going to do that here tonight, among other items contained in the staff report. So we are going to talk about some crime data. One of the things that we want to highlight is that there has been a recent change in how crime data is collected and reported at a national level. For years, as long as I've been here, 24 years, we've been using uniform crime reporting to report crime to the federal government. And now, as of November of 2022, we have changed over to the NIBR system. That's an acronym for the National Incident-Based Reporting System. What the federal government did was tried to create a way to capture data that's consistent across the country. So every police department in the United States should be reporting the same data. Specifically, the differences between these two systems is that under UCR, if you have an incident where there are multiple crimes committed, the reporting is based on the most significant. It's called the hierarchy rule. So all of the other counts or all of the other crimes associated with that incident are left out essentially. And now with NIBRs, we'll be reporting on every single crime type per incident, along with a whole host of other information that would allow us to really more accurately capture crime data and be able to report that to the community. It's going to result in better data. It'll allow us to draw comparisons with similar cities, which I know has been a question that has been raised in the past. And so we will be reporting next year when we do our year-end report on a full year of NIBR's data, and that'll give us an accurate snapshot of what truly is going on in our community. So on this slide, you'll see kind of a visual representation of how the differences in crimes are reported. I won't go through all of these, but for the top line there, a bank robbery with a vehicle pursuit and hit and run collision. Under UCR, we would have told the federal government that we had a robbery, and now we're going to tell them that we had a robbery, a vehicle pursuit, and a hit and run collision. So that's just kind of an example of what to expect. So for Part 1 crimes under UCR, again, this is data from January through October 2021 versus 2022. We wanted to create kind of a snapshot for you all based on UCR data because we can't compare it to NIBR's. As you can see, indicated on the red, in red on the right-hand side, this is the percentage in change for increases in crime. We did actually have, I know the homicide rate is not accurately reflected. We did have 11 So that is actually a 45% increase there. This is a visual representation of crime trends over a 5-year period, again, using the January through October timeframe, so 2018 to 2022. As you can see, it's pretty consistent across the board there with some spikes in 2020, which everybody experienced with the pandemic. So as far as recruitment and hiring, a couple of things that we want to touch on here tonight. One of the things that we've been doing in partnership with the Human Resources Department is hiring process mapping. So for each classification in the police department, we're taking a look collectively as a group at the individual steps, trying to identify areas where we can consolidate. Are there steps that are self-imposed that we can eliminate? And how do we expedite hiring people into the organization while maintaining the high standards that we expect of our staff. So that's been ongoing. I think we've made some progress there, and hopefully we'll be able to move to a model where we're going to be more expeditious in getting people through the hiring process given our staffing status. We've also continued with our referral program and our incentives, and we appreciate your support on that, Council. As you all know, we are offering incentives to laterals and entry-level police officers and dispatchers, and we also offer a incentive to any employee who refers somebody who makes it through the hiring process. So we appreciate that. I know that's not unique to us as an organization, but it's certainly something that helps and shows your support for us. We have made some adjustments to our recruiting strategies. One of the things that we learned, I had the opportunity to attend a course through the International Association of Chiefs of Police. That was a scientific study that was done by a police department on the East Coast, and they found that overwhelmingly digital marketing and current employee referrals were the two primary ways that people came into their organization. So understanding that, we talked about the referral program, but we are moving towards an increased presence in digital marketing and branding. We are still in contract with Epic Recruiting for that purpose, so they manage all of our social media sites. And I don't know how to do it. They know all the science behind algorithms and things like that, so they're really, really helping get our brand out there. Studies have shown that candidates are more apt to select an agency where they have a good experience in the hiring process. So what we've done is we've expanded our recruitment team and have really impressed upon them the importance of being interactive with people who come into the building with an interest of being an employee here. So there's a constant reinforcement of that. This is a visual representation of applications received, both for sworn and professional staff. As you can see, we had a very significant decrease in calendar year 2021, especially on the sworn side. That is starting to creep back up. We have increases in all of our categories if you compare 2021 to 2022. And then just as a side note, I know it's not 2023 year-end report, but we've had a significant spike in applications in January of 2023. So we're working with Epic Recruiting to figure out why that is. That's a good thing, though. This is a visual representation of a demographic breakdown of applications received by ethnicity. So there is a good range there, as you can see. This is a visual representation of our retention over a 7-year period. For the most part, it's pretty consistent. I do want to highlight that in fiscal year 2022, we did have a significant decrease. There was a high rate of turnover, and our retention rate is far lower than in years past. It's the lowest that it's been in 7 years. Obviously, this is something that we've been in communication with the city about. Because it does impact service delivery. We're having very real conversations about prioritizing our work based on some of our staffing issues. We do and have for a long time put a high value on having a well-trained department. That includes both sworn and professional staff. When you have a high level of training, obviously, you realize better outcomes. It's part of our succession planning, and it really increases our capabilities as an organization. So the top chart here has to do with people. These are the number of folks that we've gotten through training in the respective areas of professional development, technical skills, promotion, assignment, and update training. And then below is the total number of hours that we've had our staff attend training in 2022. Thanks to the great work of Scott Turner, we have been able to maintain our accreditation. As most of you know, we've been CLIA accredited since 2011. That's a very labor-intensive process to maintain, and Scott does great work in that regard. For those who don't know what CLIA is, it is an accrediting body for law enforcement agencies based on what are widely recognized as national best practices. So there's 490 professional standards that we have to show compliance with. And this is a voluntary endeavor. This is not something that's required. In fact, only 1% of police departments participate in this accreditation process. We are scheduled to have our next accreditation in March of 2025. It's a 4-year cycle. And then we'll be, again, undergoing our annual review in April, I believe, right, Scott? In May of this year. The next slide is a visual representation of use of force and external community complaints as compared to calls for service. So one of the things that we tried to look at is the percentages of calls for service that result in either a use of force or a complaint. As you can see by the charts there, it's really kind of hard to see because the numbers are incredibly low. In 2022, 0.12% of all calls for service resulted in a reportable use of force. So that's just a little over 1/10 of a percentage point, and that's consistent with previous years. Just want to highlight some of the things going on with our district command unit. As most of you know, this is our public-facing unit that deals a lot with some of the community-based issues. These are the folks who are participating on our Hayward Mobile Evaluation Team, the HMET. That's the PD component of the HEART program, which is an innovative program for alternative response to mental and behavioral health related calls for service. It's been up and running since I think June of 2021. We have a current MOU with Alameda County Behavioral Health. We pair a CIT trained officer with a behavioral mental health clinician. And it's been an incredibly successful and well-received program, not only by staff and by the Alameda County Behavioral Health clinicians, but also by the community members that we've interacted with. In calendar year 2022, they responded to 1,020 calls for service, and we had 1 reportable use of force. We also participate in coordinated response to issues associated with our unhoused community members. One of the things that we participate in is a homeless outreach response. It's a city task force made of multiple departments, and they evaluate referrals for abatements and work with service providers to connect some of our unhoused community members to services. In calendar year 2022, our district command unit responded to 1,837 calls for service regarding issues surrounding unhoused community members, and they made 115 referrals to the Navigation Center. I think at one point, once the Navigation Center was up and running, our folks were responsible for over 90% of the people who had been placed there. They were referred by district command. Coming out of the pandemic, we are starting to roll out new community engagement programs and reestablish those that we had to put on pause. We did hold 2 virtual academies, a community academy and a youth academy. We're looking forward to bringing back our Spanish academy this year. We do have 2 new crime prevention specialists who replaced Mary and Gail. Many of you know them. They did a lot of work with Neighborhood Alert and so on, so they're in the process of getting trained up to be able to take over that work. For our Youth and Family Services Bureau, this is a unit that's been in the police department for well over 40 years. They're licensed counselors and clinicians who do a lot of work with our young people. A couple of different programs that they run. One is the Delinquency Prevention Network, and this is a counseling program that offers crisis intervention, counseling, case management, and diversion services. I think the ultimate goal is to make sure that in any case that we can, when we're dealing with young people, we're diverting them away from the justice system and not towards it. It's a great resource for our officers, especially in the field. When we come in contact with somebody who would benefit from services, there can be a direct referral there. They also do life skills education and restorative justice groups. These are for youth at Camp Sweeney and Juvenile Hall, young people who have had contact with the criminal justice system, and the goal is to provide them with skills, knowledge, and the ability to keep them from further justice system involvement. And then our Explorer program, this is comprised of local youth from Hayward, many of them in our school districts. They come to the police department once a week. They get to go through training, they get exposure to the profession, and they volunteer at events and get to engage in community service with many of our staff members. So on the AB 481 military equipment update, this table is a visual representation of usage for a 6-month period. Again, you asked us to come back to the 6-month mark, and this is our report. We are going to be coming back in June to be consistent with the language in the law, to re-up the policy and the ordinance. This chart designates field use from training use in each category. And as a side note, we have not received any complaints, nor have we had any violations of policy or the ordinance with respect to this equipment. And I'm happy to answer questions about that later. And the final slide, the final thing that we're going to talk about tonight, we contract with a company called Flock. They have stationary cameras with automated license plate reader technology. These are cameras that replaced our old V5 cameras. The V5 company is pretty much defunct, and those cameras were no longer serviceable, and so we replaced them with Flock safety cameras. The goal and the thought process is to have these in areas of ingress and egress, public spaces, not neighborhoods, and it's actually an incredible resource for our staff. It's certainly enhanced solvability. It's proven to be incredibly useful in clearing significant cases. These cameras are used by many of our neighboring agencies. In fact, some agencies, Fremont and Dublin, off the top of my head, have robust networks on the exterior of their communities to be able to capture vehicle information coming in and out of town. The top chart that you'll see there, these are numbers daily that we've experienced from October 22 to January 23. And I think that at one point we were getting alert about every half an hour, either a car leaving our city or coming into it. So it's resulted in several significant cases, and it's been a great investigative tool, that we used as early as today, I think, with the incident involving our 11-year-old missing child. So great resource for us, and it's been a very successful program so far. And with that, I'll open it up for questions.
And before we open up for questions, what I'd like to do is I'd like to take the chair's prerogative and take a 5-minute break so we can stand up and stretch. So let's take 5 minutes, and we'll return. Okay, Madam City Clerk, you can start the recording anytime, yeah. Oh, it's on? Oh, okay, so we are live. Okay. I'd like to call the meeting back to order at 6:42. And so before I turn our attention to the dais, I'd like to see if there's any public comment. And there is a hand up by TJ from Hayward Concerned Citizens. So you can go ahead and key up.
Hi, Acting Chief Matthews. I just want to thank you and your staff for the very thorough and transparent report and appreciate your department's tremendous ability to make the best use of the staff and resources that you have. I appreciate your continued collaboration and your partnership with the city and our community to address public safety in Hayward. I want to thank our city leaders who approved drones and dash cams and license plate readers. It was obviously the right decision when you read the report. And I just want to give a special acknowledgement to Officer Cassandra Favell, the Community Engagement Specialist. She's done an awesome job with getting information out on social media to raise awareness about certain crime trends, highlight good outcomes, and educate others on the daily operations and departments at HPD. Some of her posts on the Nextdoor platform have started some productive discussion among our residents, and she has answered many of our general questions as well. So thanks, HPD, and keep doing what you're doing. And Hayward Concerned Citizens will continue to keep doing what we're doing, which is to support you. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. So that ends the public comment. And so return back here to the dais. I see no hands up, so I guess that concludes tonight. Oh, I'm sorry. I spoke too soon. It's not allowing us. Yeah. It's not allowed. Okay.
I won't go first though, since I went first last time.
It's okay.
Okay, so I will turn to, just because she's the mayor pro tem, I will turn to Councilmember Angela Andrews to go first.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I want to acknowledge that this PowerPoint is probably your best PowerPoint I've ever seen. So I want to give kudos to whoever created it, whoever helped out. Just want to give you your kudos on that. I do have a couple of questions. I appreciated the data that is going to come out of the NIBRS. Is that how you say it? How you say it?
NIBRS. NIBRS.
Okay, NIBRS. And I wanted to see if there will be a cross-section of this data with reporting on human trafficking. I see how it's sliced right now, but will it be a note of how human trafficking is being tracked in our community? I know it's a very complicated issue, but would that be flagged in NIBRS?
Yeah, I think so. There's like 52 different crime types, and I believe that's included in it.
Okay, all right. And then what is well, this could be in the year-end report, but is there a rate of cases being solved, particularly in residential burglary, because I see that has a significant increase in residential burglary as well as motor vehicle theft?
Yeah, I'm trying to find the page in the staff report here because I think there is
I might have missed it, so please help me.
Page 6. I'm being told
Okay.
page 6.
Thank you.
So table 4 on page 6 talks about clearance rates.
Okay, sorry. We don't have attachments on our
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
so it's okay.
Yeah.
It's in the email.
It's an email. Yeah, okay, great. So say that again, I'm sorry.
So there's a table on page 6. It does talk about clearance rates. One of the things that we're working to do, so there has been an increase in residential burglaries. There's nothing that we found in our analysis that we can point to that is like the sole contributing factor, although I think that what we saw when the pandemic hit was residential burglaries went down because people were at home and now folks are going back to work. So that could be a contributing factor. And one of the challenges is the collection and processing of physical evidence. And I know that a lot of these theft-related crimes happen when people aren't around or when they're asleep. And so we are pursuing some technological solutions, particularly in the area of fingerprint analysis, to be able to enhance some of our solvability rates, specifically with property crimes.
Okay. And then I also want to give kudos to your social media. I've seen a very, well, it's definitely improved in terms of phrasing that's being used and being it's just been a huge improvement from when I first started. So I want to give kudos for that. I do have a question though about when there's missing children, because sometimes I find information on the sheriff's social media, but I don't see anything on ours, and I also don't know when should we repost and when should we take down. Is there some kind of protocol that council members should be using when those issues arise?
So that's a great question, and one that we'll have to kind of figure out together.
Okay.
I know that, so in the city of Hayward is the Alameda County Assessment Center. And so it's literally the hub for the entire county in terms of, you know, some of these kids that are either taken into protective custody and awaiting placement, et cetera. I know a lot of the cases coming out of the county and a lot of the information that gets shared, a lot of those are kids that walk away from the assessment center. We found out just recently that the 8 deputies that were assigned to that center are going to be pulled and reassigned, and so it's going to increase our call volume there, and it's going to increase the number of missing kids that we're going to be unfortunately likely taking reports on. So. But that's a great point, and I think that maybe coming up with you know, a strategy around what to repost could be a collective effort.
Okay, yeah, that would be helpful for us. And then I wanted to also give acknowledgement to, I don't know who brought on basketball, but I know I've had at least 2 ride-alongs, and I mentioned why only baseball and why not soccer and basketball, and then all of a sudden you all did basketball. I'm not taking credit, I'm just saying I mentioned it twice, so I want to give kudos for adding that as part of your outreach, because you're actually playing the sports that, you know, different demographics play, so just want to give acknowledgement on your outreach there. And then also, I don't know if this will be available at the next report, but I know that I've been speaking with the city manager as well as acting chief about catalytic converter identifications and paper plates. And I know that you're still doing research on that, but wanted to know if you could provide a mini update on that research to the community, as that is on your radar. No pun intended.
Yeah, there's a couple of different programs that are out there. Some are partnerships with local businesses to do engraving on catalytic converters at no cost to the city and no cost to the community members. Some of them are funded through, you know, grants and things like that. So we have reached out to a number of different agencies to find out about their programs and to see what they're doing and to see what would work best for Hayward. So we are making progress on that. We've heard you, and I think you know, we're hopefully going to bring a solution forward soon.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And then 2 requests for the next year in or next time you present is when we show cost for service versus use of force. Those are 2 different data points, data sets, and if we could separate it by year versus the use of force versus cost of service, just because it looks like a drastic difference. Where I'm reading two sets of data. So if that could have historical trend, that would be great.
Okay.
And then also, this is something that comes up in the community a lot, especially when there's an issue that comes up in our community. But can you remind the public how many hours of training before officers get out in the field? We hear the community say, you know, they only get trained for 2 months and then they're out in the field, when we know that's not necessarily the case. But there is a concern about lack of training. I think you all have showed the data of how much training you do ongoing, but can you just remind the public of how much training it actually is before they actually serve on duty?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to do that. So it's pretty much from the day an employee onboards and starts the police academy to the day that he or she, is released to solo patrol. You're looking at probably a calendar year. The academy is a little over 6 months. We follow that up with a 3-week in-house academy to orient employees coming out of the academy to our computer systems, our policies, the way that we do things. And then there's usually anywhere from 17 to 20 weeks of field training. Sometimes that gets pushed out a little bit longer because everybody develops at a different speed, but it's pretty much a calendar year before somebody is ready to go out on solo patrol.
Okay, and then my last question is, what is the coordination with Caltrans and exits? Because I am starting to see an increase of activity at freeway exits, and we know in particular, Tennyson has had 4 fatalities there, so that is a very dangerous on-ramp, off-ramp situation, and I'm seeing encampments there, I'm seeing a lot of debris there. So what is the coordination with police and Caltrans to resolve issues there?
So we are in communication with Caltrans on a regular basis. I know District Command is, particularly when we're talking about encampments and things like that. It gets a little wonky because the jurisdictional line starts where the on-ramp or the off-ramp starts, right? Or the off-ramp ends, actually. And so we have assisted them with certain abatements in the past, particularly those that have a significant safety component to them. But a lot of what we deal with not just Caltrans, but Union Pacific on the railroad side, and even some of the BART properties, we often receive the complaints, and it's their property. So there is constant communication. Unfortunately, we don't have the ability to necessarily force their hand in addressing it, but there is constant dialogue there.
Okay. Thank you. That's all I have.
Thanks.
Since my view of speakers isn't working, I randomly went ahead and designated the speaker list. So next is Councilmember Goldstein, and then I'm going to go to Councilmember Roach.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Acting Chief Matthews, for your thorough report, and also thank you for making it brief. It makes me wonder, how are we going to fill the next 2 hours? Oh, okay, I'm glad I got some laughter out of that. Thank you. I'll try to be brief. The NIBRS data, I'm actually, as someone that's done crime analysis for a period of time, I really see that as being a very valuable tool for the analysts in the department. But is that data going to be publicly accessible? For example, would it port over to crime mapping?
Certain aspects of it will, and we can certainly explore, updating our website with an external-facing crime data, matrix, for lack of a better term. We can look at doing something like that. I know that it is going to result in a lot more accurate data, but it is a very time-consuming endeavor. But we can certainly explore ways to push out routine updates on that.
Yeah, because I have the experience in doing crime analysis, and because Hayward PD has the data publicly available, I would like to perhaps lead a class for the public on how to make use of that data. In the past, I used that crime mapping data to great effect. It actually led to the arrest and prosecution of 18 people involved in a chop shop. And it also led to 3 people caught burglarizing a home in the neighborhood, and the subsequent effect on crime in the neighborhood was a 96% reduction in home burglaries and a 98% reduction in auto thefts, and that persisted for 3 years. So very, very valuable set of tools, and I'd be willing to share that in the class. I'll also be looking for the data.
Mm-hmm. That'd be great.
I understand that you have an armored vehicle that was disclosed in the 481 report, and but I also heard that the vehicle that you have is in kind of shabby condition at this point, or am I thinking of a different vehicle? You had.
We do have an armored vehicle. We've had it since about 2008. We've had to replace the windows a couple of times, and I think we will be at some point in the future looking for a replacement for that.
Okay.
So.
Are there any thought to replacing the vehicle with something that looks, functionally can do the same job, but maybe isn't as militaristic looking?
Open to suggestions on that for sure. I mean, we're at the mercy of what the manufacturers produce and deliver. But if we wanted to make modifications to it, whether that's a paint job or, we would certainly be open to that. I mean, at the end of the day, what we care about is, being able to protect our community members and our staff. It's literally the one that we have is a Ford pickup truck chassis that stops bullets, and so. We want to make sure for us, it's more about the function than the appearance.
Sure. Yeah, I didn't mean to imply otherwise, only that some people use the appearance as a way to denigrate the profession. And if there's a way to build bridges without sacrificing performance and safety for the officers, then I would be inclined towards that solution. That's
Sure.
all I'm saying.
Yep, we're all for it.
Tell me a little bit about the Navigation Center referrals when, because I think there's limited capacity at the Navigation Center. What happens when you have someone that you would normally refer, but you don't have a place to take them? Are there other facilities that are available? Would you just take them to John George, or what's that look like?
No, not necessarily defaulting to John George. So obviously, the district command folks, based on their involvement in addressing issues with unhoused community members, they have a rapport with folks. They know them by name. And so, and now with, the clinicians that we have working with the city are able to understand some of the issues that they deal with. The Navigation Center placement there is by referral only. You can't walk in there. And so a lot of the folks that our district command staff members interact with who want to be connected to services, and I think that's an important distinction. Our staff is kind of the conduit for getting them placed there. They have by all accounts, a good working relationship with Bax and the folks that run that place. So that's kind of the process. There are other service providers, but I think that we would all agree that, as a county, we're hurting for services. There's a lot of folks that need it, and not a lot of places to go with them. So it's not a default to John George. That's specific to somebody that fits the criteria for 5150 hold. But most folks that want to get connected to services, we're trying to do that through service providers.
Good, very good, and hopefully with the St. Regis coming online as a new Bax operated service center, hopefully that'll take some of the pressure off and give people access to the resources and treatment that they sorely need. The speaker that we had earlier in the night talked about physical abuse. Of course, there is mandatory reporting there. Are you aware of any issues of abuse that are or are not being reported at the Navigation Center?
So the claim, the information that was brought forward tonight is new to me. I have not heard that before, and I know that there's a we don't want to be there too often, right? I think one of the concerns that in our conversations with Bax and some of the folks who work with our community members there, there's a concern about having the police on site on a regular basis, and so we respond as issues arise. But that was the first time that I had heard any of that.
And I'll just indicate, I also was texting with our community services manager, and she was not aware of those complaints either. And she is the contract manager that oversees all of Bax's contracts. So I think there'll be some follow-up from our team just to see where that is coming from. But we have not received reports either in community services or at PD of those allegations.
Okay, yeah, the only thing that I'd heard, and this is completely anecdotal, I don't even remember who told me, but I think it was a bus driver happened to be driving by the navigation center and then told me that he witnessed a fist fight out in the parking lot that made him fearful. But like I say, I don't know if that's what that story is now maybe getting amplified, or maybe there is an issue there that we don't know about yet.
We've responded to isolated incidents there for sure, but yeah, this is, I don't know, I took it as more of a ongoing issue, so we'll have to look into that.
Okay, very good. And I really do want to commend you with the staffing that you have, your ability to pull together in a way that has such a positive impact on the community. Your department really deserves to be commended for that. And we know that it's our responsibility to see through on our commitments to get you staffed up and funded for technology and new building. We do recognize that. Be patient with us. We are working on it.
Thank you.
Councilmember Roach.
Thank you. Thank you, Acting Chief Matthews. And it's actually really nice that you're here, because when I'm talking to people online, I don't know where to look. It's very weird. So appreciate you being here tonight.
It's nice to be in the room.
On the issue of recruitment, I know you said you found out the biggest way to recruit is social media or word of mouth. Is there anything else that you need our support with that you'd like to try creatively to try to recruit? And also, what are you doing to recruit locally? I mean, since cost of living is obviously a huge issue with recruitment, trying to prioritize or incentivize or something local recruits who are, presumably already here.
Absolutely. So we've done a host of pop-up events in town. We do, we always prefer to recruit local talent. We are also in conversations with both Cal State East Bay and Chabot College to develop pipelines to get people into the police department. So working with criminal justice programs and some of the instructors there, we're looking at building formalized internships for people to get exposure to the police department. I've had conversations with people about what a program, providing some tuition assistance, right, with the understanding that we're going to get whatever 5 or 10 years out of you on the back end of that. So there's a lot of conversations that are going on there. We do still send people to a host of different recruiting events, some that are specifically focused on people who are transitioning out of the military, some that are specifically focused on diversity events. And so, we're still doing all of those things. But locally here, like I said, this agency, they found that the best way to get people in the building was through the digital marketing and also referrals. And so I would also just remind everybody who's watching or in the room, if you know somebody who's interested, send them our way.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, I really like the idea if you're going to have internships to try to pay people to do the internships, because that might create more of an incentive. So, yeah, thank you. Good luck with it. It sounds like you said you're seeing a small uptick in applications anyway.
It was a pretty good uptick in January of this year, and
Okay.
I know that if you look at the cycle, at least in our profession, public safety. Oftentimes when you see, layoffs happening in the private sector and in tech, people start, looking to get back into government public safety work. I'm not sure if that's what's going on here, but I know some of that stuff is happening. If you're a person of character and you love serving this community, we'll take you.
Okay, great. And then on the slide about crime trends, it's funny because if you look at Nextdoor, if you look at some of the things online, there's this perception that there's this huge increase in crime since the pandemic that has only continued to rise. And so it's interesting to see that it's actually been pretty consistent. I was just wondering, before 2018, has it remained consistent? I don't need a big sort of history on it, but has the trend sort of consistently been this way, or has there been a gradual uptick?
So crime's pretty cyclical sometimes, and it's I think year over year, when you look at a 5 or a 7 year period, there's not a lot of variation. There are years where you're going to have increases. I think 2020 was an example of that for us. And it doesn't look like, on that one particular, slide necessarily that it was a significant uptick, but it was an uptick. Crime comes in waves sometimes. And, we sit in a major metropolitan area right in the middle of it. And so what we're finding also is that, when you look at offender data, there's a lot of people that are coming from out of town and doing stuff here. So, it really just depends on a whole host of variables. But, year over year, it's in the ballpark.
And are our trends pretty consistent with neighboring communities as well?
Yes,
Okay.
and a lot of the crime-related issues are regional, and so especially in a time where we're hurting for staffing, we have to leverage those relationships with other agencies because people aren't paying attention to jurisdictional borders. They're moving.
Yeah, and I agree with Councilmember Andrews that the social media posts are really great, and I think this is kind of information the community needs to see because anecdotally people have their opinions, and then it's the whole city is full of crime, and I think to understand this trend in some sort of small bite, easy to digest way on social media might be great.
Okay.
Might be helpful.
Yep.
Let's see. The other question I had was about the youth and family services, just how people access those services, and what has removing the SRO officers from the schools done to change how people access those services?
So the SROs really served as a bridge to YFSB. They were in the schools, they had relationships with a lot of these kids, and knew who needed access to services. So that has impacted some of it, I think, but our counselors are still working in the school districts. They're still working with juvenile probation. They're working with other area service providers. A lot of them are taking referrals from teachers, taking referrals from our staff, from other community stakeholders. For folks that don't know, if you live in the city of Hayward and you're a young person, you can get up to 20 counseling sessions a year, and then our folks will make a determination about whether some longer-term care is appropriate and make referrals there. But they're mostly referred by folks.
Okay, so the referrals haven't necessarily slowed down then, as far as that goes. Okay.
No, they haven't. In fact, they've been pretty consistent, and kudos to our staff for figuring out how to get that work done. They've been using telehealth, I think, is the name of the program, but they had to do it virtually through the pandemic, and we're able to provide services for a lot of folks, even in spite of the pandemic.
Great, thank you so much for the report.
Councilmember Zedmenyo. And then Councilmember Marquez is next.
Thank you. And Deputy Chief, excellent report, very detailed. That's very important. So over on page 4, people tell me that crime is really risen in California, and they want to move away because crime is so bad. But I only see, if I read it correctly, a 7% increase over last year on page 4. Is that what?
7% increase in total property crime, I think is that.
So that would be close to the whole safety issue in my mind. Okay, so all right, a couple other questions too. So speaking with residents about our downtown, they tell me that they feel unsafe there. When can we have walking and or bike beats again? Is that in the works somehow?
We would love to flip the switch and be able to do that right now, I think. Those are some of the positions that we have on hold just given our staffing shortages. When you talk to, any command level person in any police department, patrol is what we have to staff first. When people pick up the phone and dial 911, we got to be able to respond. Everything else, is as staffing allows. Mm-hmm. And I think we would love to get back to a place where we have dedicated downtown units. Right now, we actually, District Command does spend some time monitoring that area, but they're citywide, and so they get pulled in a lot of different directions. We do hire, we try to hire overtime, so we do post overtime positions specifically to work the downtown, but if there's a sick call or if we go out short on patrol, those people inevitably end up getting pulled and assigned to a beat. So it is a challenge, but one that we're willing to continue to look at.
All right, thank you. Please do that. Colleague Roche asked about SROs. That was going to be my question too, but I'll let that one go. The decision to move away from the Tennyson Road office to the church 3 blocks away, was that money-wise, crime-wise?
So I think there was
that decision?
There was a couple of different issues. The building that we were in on Tennyson Road was not in the best condition. The property owner was, quite frankly, not easy to deal with. But what really I think kind of spurred the move was the opportunity, right? I think you have an opportunity to really build relationships with, the Palmacia Baptist congregation and that neighborhood. It's a facility that the city has used in the past. It was already set up for audio, video, all the things that we need to set computers up there. And it really was an opportunity for what I envisioned to be a strong partnership moving forward, with the Palmacia Baptist folks in that community. So,
in my mind, it's also a good opportunity. So
yes,
both of those, but
absolutely.
It's just the loss of having that presence on that retail center.
Yes.
Do we still have a satellite office at the Mateo Jimenez Center? There used to be one. Is that ever?
I don't think we've had a satellite office there for quite some time. I think the office that was there moved to the site on Tennyson, and that has now moved to Palmacia Baptist.
All right. Tell us a little bit, when can we expect dash cams?
So thank you to council for approving that program. We have the funding. It's a matter of the delay from the vendor. So we were quoted 12 to 18 months for the equipment. I think that's associated with all the backlog that everybody's experienced from the pandemic, but we're hoping to have that in place and implemented as soon as possible.
Did you order them for only the patrol cars or for also the non-patrol cars?
So primarily the patrol cars, and then also some of the other unmarked. Some of them, yeah. Not all of them, but some of them.
That's a good decision. You still use, and I asked this before, and you said it's federal law. You still use the word military equipment. Any way we can start saying safety equipment? I mean, there's still this notion out there in the community, and not just the Hayward community, other communities, that the police use military equipment. And when they visualize it, they see tanks and grenade launchers and grenades. And that's not what we would ever use here. Right. Even guns. Soldiers, I don't think, use guns anymore. We have guns. So give us the scoop again as to why you keep doing military equipment.
That's just specific to the language that's in the bill itself. And I think it was born out of the 1033 program where, law enforcement agencies had the ability to get surplus equipment from the military to be used in public safety settings, and so I think that's where the military equipment term came from, because some of it was very much directly from the military, not for us, but for other agencies.
Other agencies. Okay, how close are we to full force?
I know that the staff report that we submitted said that we had 42 police officer vacancies. We now we have 43, with another one pending in about 2 weeks. We did just start 6 new people.
Okay.
So we have 3 in the academy now, and then we have 6 that are going to be going to the academy here in March. With a lateral candidate, she worked for a few years in Oakland, and is now coming to us. So we are getting people coming in the building, but with that vacancy rate, it'll take us a little bit of time to catch up.
Very good. I'm a basketball player, so I really appreciate the basketball clinic that you're doing. I'm an ex and still a soccer player. Maybe sometime you can share with us a soccer flyer so we can get it to the kids. I think it's important. Get the kids involved with the community, with the police officer, public safety community. So,
absolutely.
All of you, please be safe out there, and thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
report.
Councilmember Marquez, and somebody had to go last, so I picked you good last.
You want to switch? Okay. Thank you, Acting Chief Matthews and team, everyone, for being here late. I do have a lot to say, so I'm going to try to be as concise as I can. But I want to start on a positive note, and we'll keep it positive. But just want to share that I did have the opportunity to do a ride-along with District Command with Faye Maloney back in October. In January, I did a ride-along with Joey Fiandor. And I'm a straight shooter. I'm not going to say stuff that's not true. And I will say consistently, along with the ride-along I did last year, and I apologize, I don't remember the patrol officer's name, but he's really adamant about DUIs and great at it. He's received accolades for that. So last name starts with an L, but I'm not recalling what it is right now. But so that's 3 interactions in maybe 13, 14 months, and I will say consistently what I've observed is what's important to me is, I'm just going to say it, you have to want to work here to work here. If you don't want to work here, there's plenty of other jobs, there's other stuff in the world. Like, you have to want to serve this community. It is a very, very diverse community. And the interactions that I observed are staff that I feel care and understand the demographics, the dynamics, just all the layers that come into working in the city of Hayward. So what I did observe is, level of respect and great communication, and I just hope that we could consistently do that. I know it's a very challenging job, and there's going to be, human behavior. There's going to be mistakes. It's not always going to be ideal and pretty, and I understand that. But my goal is just that we try to put our best foot forward as we possibly can. So I feel like we are moving in a good direction. I feel that the council is really being heard in terms of the AB 481, bringing that information back in 6 months. It's a lot of tracking, it's a lot of requests, but also there's been a lot of reform in the last 2 years. So it's also just having information available to the public. Something else that I know that I requested, and I really appreciate you, Chief, for honoring this, but when we have had a homicide or a critical incident, you've been here to just give an announcement to the public. We can't always disclose everything. Things are under investigation, but the information that we can, and I appreciate the input you've taken that I've asked on the, the crime reports that are published every week. So I just really appreciate all the efforts that have been made. I know Councilmember Andrews has ideas and referrals she would like to put forward. I appreciate her working with the police department and just doing the ask instead of having us have to do this formal vote. We could get a lot done by just communicating, and that's been proven. So just thank you for being open and receptive, because I know it's not easy, but I just want to acknowledge that. I do have some questions about the NIBRS, is that how you pronounce it? Does it have the ability to capture individuals' gender preference? I'm just curious, is that tracked? Yes, okay.
The experts are saying yes
Okay.
over there.
So I'm curious about that, and particularly around, well, for all incidents, but I'm concerned about the rape. Would like to have more information on that. And then also the domestic violence incidents. How are we connecting them to resources? Is it within our Youth and Family Bureau services, or are we connecting them to our local nonprofits? Can you speak to, because those numbers consistently are high. So obviously it's an issue here in Hayward.
It is an issue, and it is an issue that's not just here in Hayward. So I will say that one of the things that we do consistently when we're interacting with a victim of domestic violence is we have a pamphlet with a host of resources for them. We partner with agencies like Ruby's Place. We partner with shelters to get people placed if need be. We do work with, our advocates, SAVE, I think SAVE is the group, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, we work with SAVE advocates to be able to provide that support. And then we also, the district attorney's office has victim witness advocate employees that help guide victims through the criminal court process, and also in certain cases can connect them to funding. So there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes with that. A lot of it used to go through Youth and Family Services. Now a lot of it goes through our investigations division.
Okay. So I don't expect a response right now, but maybe when time's appropriate, if the staff that works intimately with that,
Yep.
if they have any ideas that can be brought forward to our community services manager when we're looking at funding for our RFPs, if there's something we're missing, I think it'd just be helpful to try to make that connection if at all possible. And then with respect to, and I apologize, I said Councilmember Andrews, but Mayor Pro Tem Andrews, I know she's deeply concerned about Caltrans property and just the site of the encampments and people's safety. City manager stepped out of the room, but I will ask when she gets back, or I'll tell her later, if we could write a letter to our new state legislators, because we're going to need support on that, to our assembly and new senator as well. We can't do that heavy lifting alone, but I think we need to apply a little bit more pressure because it continues to be an issue and I don't quite understand. But I drive up and down 880, 580, 680, and Hayward and another city look the worst. So we need to figure that out. We can't do that alone. And in terms of, thank you for the incentives. It sounds like it's working. I agree with the comments about social media. I also struggle. I don't always have capacity to share the missing adults, missing children. Whenever I can, I do. But what I struggled with just a week ago, someone's telling me the person's been found, but I haven't received the email. So I'm like, do I just trust someone's word? Like, how do I verify this? So there's got to be a mechanism to track that, because as much as I possibly can, I do like to share that information out. And I know in the past there was an individual I would frequently see, so I was concerned about this elderly person wandering. So, the best that we can, connect people to services to make sure that they are safe and staying protected. And also just want to share, you made a comment about command staff really knowing the unsheltered population and building rapport. I've observed that, and so I really appreciate that sensitivity and really going the extra mile to try to connect them to services. I know it's not easy, but I think we always have room for improvement, but I'm very pleased with this report. My last question is about the external complaints. How can we be informed as a council in terms of, is there a trend? Is there something we should be aware of? How do you suggest we kind of close the loop on that?
That's a great question, one that we can, again, going back to what we talked about earlier on another topic, maybe collaborate and strategize around. I know that we share complaint information as a part of the CLIA process. So if you go to the website, the report from the assessors that come in is available for public consumption, and there is a component there related to complaints. But in terms of trends, I know that internally there is a year-end report that is provided to the chief and the command staff from internal affairs. It's one of the things that we do on an annual basis. It's part of our CLIO requirement, but it's also a best practice to sit down and take a look at not only external complaints, but vehicle pursuits and all of these things. And can we identify training needs? Can we identify, policy needs, et cetera? That work does happen internally, but we'll strategize on a way to incorporate, the
Okay, thank
other
you.
stakeholders in that process.
Okay, and then last comment, I know it's a heavy subject. We've already kind of been briefed on the issues with dispatch. We'll obviously get updates in terms of next steps, but I do appreciate, I pushed really hard for the incentive also to be in dispatch, not just with sworn. So I just make that comment because as much as we can be as consistent and fair as possible, I think we need to do more of that. It just, just want to be supportive to all of our members in the division, whether they're sworn or not. Thank
Absolutely. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Councilmember Syro.
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Acting Chief Matthews and the rest of your team for compiling this report. I recognize this is a monumental undertaking, so the detail did not go unnoticed. I have a lot of questions. My Legistar wasn't working, so I'm just going to kind of work through the document. I just wanted to give you some context. And then I also have some comments interspersed throughout, so I just wanted to preface it with that. I was curious, of the vacant positions that you currently have, what are the ways in which your department has been allocating those dollars towards the services within the department?
So there's a combination of different things. I know some of the frozen positions are being used to fund some of the innovation projects that you are all familiar with. We do try to identify what we call per diem staff, people who are retired annuitants to be able to come on board and do some of that work. We use some of it for training. We've used some of it for equipment purchases, et cetera. So there's a host of different things that we do. The other thing that we've used it for, we don't have a budgetary allocation for consultant services, and I know now with our policy of, contracting out to subject matter experts, third-party consultants for officer-involved shootings, et cetera, all of those things are typically funded through salary savings.
Understood. Thank you. I was impressed to read about the crisis intervention training. The quote in the report says that it introduces staff to the stigma associated with mental illness, intellectual disabilities, and substance abuse disorders. I was curious if the training also includes physical disabilities, because I recognize there are physical signs that officers are trained to respond to in a situation, but that might vary if somebody has a physical disability.
I believe it does. I know that all of our FTOs have gone through that 40-hour program. You talking about that? So it does address physical disabilities too.
Great, thank you. I was curious about the third-party complaints. I may be mistaken, but I believe as part of the public safety workshops, there was a desire to create a role outside of the police department to receive complaints, and maybe it's been an issue of staffing at the city level. But I was curious about the status of that program.
That's correct. We've had some turnover in the city manager's office, which is where that project was getting led out of, and so hopefully we've now hired some new staff, so hopefully we can get that particular project reinitiated.
Great, thank you. And do we have an idea or a timeline for that? I recognize this is a new hire.
Not right yet, because the same staff are right now in the throes of storm response and helping homeowners file FEMA reports. So it's kind of, they do a lot of everything. So we'll, as soon as we can get a timeline, we'll provide it to council.
Great, thank you. I was grateful to see the percentage of use of force relative to calls of service, similar to, I believe it was Mayor Pro Tem Andrews' comment about the data. I would be curious what percentage of calls of service translate to an officer being dispatched to a scene, and just finding data that, and I also read that it's really hard to quantify on a day-to-day basis officers interacting with the public, but just getting a better picture of when officers are actually on the scene from a call and the use of force ratio there, which I imagine would still be a pretty big difference, but I think that data would be a bit more accurate in telling us.
The call for service number that's provided is a reflection of a physical response to a scene.
Okay.
But it's not, it's a combination of, things that are in progress, things that are cold, right? So what we consider a cold call where you don't have an offender on scene, it's not happening right now, case in point, I show up to my business on Monday morning and it's been burglarized, right?
Yeah.
So that encompasses all of it.
Okay,
that number.
thank you. I believe this is page 17 at the top of it. There were 3 complaints filed against PD employees related to a reportable use of force. I was just curious how many of those were unfounded or pending investigation. I think the 33 external complaints were addressed, but I didn't see a number responding to the 3 complaints.
Yeah, I don't have that information to share at this point.
Okay.
I'll have to follow up with that.
Thank you. Just wanted to say thank you for the tour of HPD headquarters the other week. It was great to see the workplace and meet a lot of your team and see them in their element. You're running a very complex operation, and I was surprised at how understaffed our traffic department was, just given the amount of services they provide to the city. I was curious about the collaboration between the traffic division and our city, and this paragraph in the traffic section on what page is it? 18 mentions that we receive a STEP grant, and I was curious if some of that funding goes towards improving what are identified as dangerous streets. So there's obviously the issue of traffic safety and people using a street in a dangerous way, but we can also work to improve the street so that it disincentivizes or makes it impossible to drive as dangerously. I was curious if that's been a conversation.
So a couple of things. So the STEP grant, unfortunately, is specific to the DUI, seatbelt, distracted driving related issues. But our traffic folks actually do work with the engineering folks on addressing for example, speeding issues through environmental design or through street design. So there is collaboration that happens on a regular basis in that regard. But in terms of that grant itself, unfortunately, it's specific to those issues that are listed.
Got it, thank you. And then just along the lines of helping officers, especially sworn officers, focus on policing bad behavior, a lot of these responsibilities, I'm curious just in your opinion or in conversations with that department, do you feel like all of the responsibilities outlined required a sworn officer to perform?
I'm sorry, can you ask that
one
one more time?
So there's community tow hearings, taxi cab approval inspection, commercial truck permitting and enforcement. Are all the traffic officers sworn? And if so, do you believe that they need to be sworn in order to perform those duties?
Probably some of them could be performed by somebody like a community service officer, for example. I know like when you're dealing with commercial stuff, there's very specialized training that's required, so that would probably be something that would fall to an officer. But some of that stuff might be able to be performed by professional staff.
Great, thank you. And just ballparking it, how much do we get from STEP approximately? I'm just curious.
I think the most recent award was about 250-ish.
Okay, thank you.
225, I'm being
told.
All
right, thank you, 225. I really appreciated the data that was broken down by demographics. I'd like to also know if I can find information by location. I think that might help reflect a bit more information to council as well as to where and what communities could use, which communities could use support. One moment. I just wanted to commend your team on the Juvenile Delinquency Prevention Network. I think a lot of that work is really incredible. To see how many folks have been diverted away from the criminal justice system is something that we should aspire to. And I'm also appreciative of the way HPD has taken to the HMET program. I know it was kind of a bumpy road to get there and develop this, but I'm grateful that it's being received well by everybody involved. And then, I promise I'm almost done, I swear. I was curious if YFSB has any plans on expanding the counseling services offered through HUSD?
I mean, I think we would always take more. I think, the school district pays for a portion of the counseling services, and then a lot of the other positions are funded through different grants. But, we would always take more on the counseling side. I know that there's been, if you talk to folks that work in that field, even with our Alameda County behavioral health partners that we work in the HMET with, they're struggling for recruitment too, for those positions. So, but we would always take more.
Great, thank you. And then I think I'll just save my questions regarding military equipment for the June presentation.
Okay.
I think it's been a late meeting. And I just wanted to say thank you for, there's a note where it says it should be noted that we do not share any collected data with federal law enforcement agencies, including those responsible for immigration enforcement. And I appreciated that was included in the report and glad that the police department is upholding that standard. Thank you.
And I believe Mayor Pro Tem has asked me for one more question.
It'll be quick. I know that you and I discussed traffic stops and reviewing a list and the reasons why we have to have a sworn officer make those stops versus we can consider something else. That will be part of the June report, correct?
The
Possibly?
June report is specific to the AB 481
Okay.
update.
Is there any
yeah.
way we can have that come back? As
On
just
the traffic stop?
At some point?
Yeah, we can find a time for that
Okay,
for sure.
thank you.
Yep.
Nice. Thank you. First of all, I just wanted to thank you and your staff for putting together this report. It's very timely, and I think a lot of the questions over the years and a lot of the comments that we've had, I think are now sort of reflecting the reports now. And it's a long one, but it's good. I appreciate it. And charts and graphs are always good, and so I think what you have here is a really good report. So thank you for investing the time in that. One of the points in the report I wanted to ask, that is not in here, is data on school data. Service calls to schools, and I was just curious, in the future, what kind of data could we include in a staff report like this that would sort of give us a snapshot on some of the nature of the service calls going to schools, basically.
We can certainly include that. And quite honestly, I think we've included that in previous reports. And so I'll take the hit for not having that in this one.
Yeah,
but
no.
we can certainly do that moving forward.
Okay, yeah. The other one too is, do we? Because I know Chabot has their own security program, and I know Cal State of East Bay, of course, they have their own police department. Do we share, or do they? Do we ask them to provide data to us as to, service calls up there, and what are some of the problems, or what are some of the issues that they're perhaps facing up there? I mean, do we talk to them, or do we not talk to them?
We do talk to them. I know the chief going back to his time with the Alameda County Sheriff's Office up at Cal State East Bay. He's part of the Alameda County Chiefs group, so we see each other on a monthly basis. So there's communication back and forth. We've covered calls for them up there before. We've responded and taken over major investigations up there before that they really didn't have the staff capacity for. Mm-hmm. So there is networking that takes place. Chabot, I think the security director is one of our retirees, right? Never mind. I'm wrong. He just left. They sound like they might be recruiting for one, but we do engage in conversations. I know we've gone over to Chabot and provided their security staff with some training before, so there is dialogue that happens on a regular basis.
Okay. So the one ask I would ask is, in the future, as we put together this, if we can somehow incorporate school data from K-12 to college and university, so it'd be interesting to see some of the patterns and trends there. I wanted to just comment on recruitment, outreach and recruitment. And I know, that is an ongoing process. But, I went to the last promotion ceremony that you had here at City Hall. And, I just really wanted to commend you on the diversity that you had represented in your promotions, from sergeants to lieutenants and lieutenants to captains. And it was noticeable. Clearly here on slide 9, just that, I think we're getting to a place where, the police department's getting diverse. It's noticeable out in the street. It's now not uncommon to hear a police officer speak in Spanish or Chinese or any of the other languages that that lives here in Hayward, and so I just really wanted to sort of elevate that and and say good job on that. That's something that I know we have been over the years. The council has been talking about that, and so clearly the police department has been responding to that. So I really wanted to commend you on that. The neighborhood alert program. Just wanted to see what's going on with that. I know it was kind of trugging along, and so I just wanted to see what's going on.
Yeah, I went by the wayside for a little bit. We're trying to reinvigorate. I know that James and Alicia are working, with Chuck and some of the folks who are trying to get the board back up and running and meeting on a regular basis and trying to, re-implement that program. I think that was certainly an opportunity to collaborate with people on issues that are important to them in their neighborhoods. And so anything that we can do to help support, we're happy to do. Again, having to prioritize work, but I think that's on the list.
Yeah, good. Good, because I know they're highly valued. I know community members like them, and I've noticed. I know the last couple of national nights out were during the pandemic, but over the years when we've had strong, robust neighborhood alert programs, National Night Out was big, because they often translate into these neighborhood parties, these block parties. And so anyways, it really does build community, and it really builds support for City Hall and of course for the department. So community engagement, I just wanted to acknowledge all of the work you guys have been doing during for community engagement. Even during the pandemic, I mean, a lot of the, I know Junior Giants sort of was put on hold, but then it was quickly transitioned to online activities. And based on, some of the conversations I've had with some of your colleagues, it was successful. And then, of course, last year it was held at a park, outdoors. And so, clearly, making sure kids have healthy, fun activities during the summertime when school's not in session is always, it's always been good. So thank you for that. I don't know if Junior Giants, somebody, I think someone posted something the other day, asked me if Junior Giants is coming back. I don't know if there's any plans for Junior Giants to come back, because I know it was.
I don't know if this year is going to happen, unfortunately.
Okay.
But we are going to continue with the basketball program and explore other ways to get kids out.
Good. Okay. And then lastly, I got an email, and I forwarded it to you, about there was a retail clerk who was growing concerned, and she was frightened because there was a smash and grab at Macy's at Southland, and I'm not diminishing her experience, because I know those are often traumatic and scary. But I was just curious: are we seeing peaks in that, or are they sort of leveling off? Are we how are we responding to that? Just kind of curious about.
So the retail theft is certainly still an issue, and I think the growing concern has been reflected by some legislation that's come out related to that. It does pose a challenge, particularly for a city like ours that has a mall And so, we do see that, continuing from time to time. One of the challenges is that, we can't fix what we don't know about, and sometimes, people don't report, or we get significant delays in reporting, and so we always encourage people to call, but it is a problem. It's still going on, not just here, but up and down the East Bay.
Yeah. Okay. Lastly, I wanted to just acknowledge, of course, your other team members that are up on the top floor, the dispatchers. I know they have incredibly tough jobs. They're often the first, they're the first voice we hear when there's an emergency and crisis. And so I just really wanted to acknowledge them and make sure that when you go back to your office, make sure they know that we certainly appreciate the work that they're doing. And also I wanted to just, and based on what I'm hearing up here, and I'm real pleased with the tone and the tenor that we have up here on the dais, but I just wanted to assure you and all your colleagues, and I know Captain Olson over there. We haven't really been looking over there because all of our attention's been over here, but we absolutely support all of you, and please know that. Please tell your staff, your officers. We all of us have their safety in mind. All of us want them to come home at the end of the day. And, we really just want to make sure that you're supported, that they're supported. And if there's anything you need from us, absolutely let us know. And please tell your staff that and tell your team that. And thank you for their service.
Thank you very much. We wouldn't be successful as an organization without your support. So we certainly appreciate that. And we also appreciate the feedback, good or bad. We appreciate the dialogue. We appreciate the tough questions. We're in a constant state of trying to get better. We're not always going to get everything, right because we hire from the human race, but we're committed to doing our best for this community. It's home to me, so we appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so seeing, moving on to council reports and announcements. Do we have any council reports and announcements?
I just want to thank the staff who's worked on Campus Drive. We got some really good feedback.
Oh, yes.
So
I heard that.
thank you to Public Works, city management staff.
Even Dr. Lewis complimented. That's
yes, Dr.
huge.
Lewis
Yeah, I heard that.
complimented
That's
us, Ms. Go. So thank you all for your hard work on that.
I did receive a couple of emails complaining about the improvements on Campus Drive. So not everybody is happy, so that we learned the lesson. Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Were the emails George.Syrup? No, okay, no, they weren't.
No, I actually showed up with Velda to complain to the city prior to getting elected. So I just wanted to give a shout out to Velda and her neighbors for organizing to make it happen. And thank you to staff for seeing it through and responding to the community.
Yeah, nice. Thank you. Anybody else? No? Since there are no council referrals, ladies and gentlemen, meeting is adjourned.
Record.